Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the December 1, 2021 Executive Committee meeting. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of Treaty 4 territory, a treaty signed with 35 First Nations across southern Saskatchewan and parts of Alberta and Manitoba, and the original lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. To ensure social distancing measures are being met during this time, some members of the city administration, I think there might be councillors too, online, and some councillors are attending the meeting today through video conferencing. I would like to remind those who are attending through video conferencing the following. Please ensure that your video camera and microphone are turned off. If a member of committee wishes to speak, use the raised hand function to be placed into a speaking queue. When speaking, remember to unmute your microphone and enable your video camera, and all votes will be conducted with a recorded vote. Reports will be considered by City Council at its meeting scheduled for December 8th, and the deadline to register as a delegation for the City Council meeting is 12 noon on Monday, December 6th. Before we start, I do want to just say a few things. I want to wish everyone who is celebrating Hanukkah a happy Hanukkah. And I also want to send our thoughts from Regina to residents of British Columbia who are going to be receiving even more rain these days after they've had some devastating floods that have destroyed complete communities. So just our thoughts are with them. Approval of the agenda. Can I have someone move a motion to approve the agenda at the call of the chair? Councillor Bresciani. Or is there anyone opposed? None. That is carried. Approval of the minutes. Can I have someone move a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the Executive Committee held on November 17th, 2021. Councillor Stevens, were there any errors or omissions? I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed to the minutes? I see no hands. It is carried. So first off, we have a delegation. I'd like to call upon the delegation Matt Coley, Anthony Hammer, and Shelley Spence. Please introduce yourself for the record, the organization you are representing, if any, and where you are from. I am going to turn on your mics. I think that would be helpful. Oops, the wrong ones. Thank you. Okay, they do. Sorry. I'll let 1, 2, 3, 4 right there.
Thank you.
Mr. Holden.
Good morning, members of Exec Committee and through the chair. It's an exciting day in terms of the efficiency review report that's being presented today. So in July of 2021, Deloitte began reviewing 6 city service areas to identify opportunities for savings and innovation, which enables the city to reinvest those gains in the community and to accomplish more using our existing resources. Those 6 service areas are procurement, roadways management, fleet lifecycle management, facilities management, parks and open space management, and information technology. And today, Deloitte will present its final report to Exec Committee. It'll outline 53 opportunities for efficiency, including a high-level implementation plan for 14 of those prioritized opportunities. The estimated benefit of those 14 priorities opportunities is approximately $17.2 million annually, with a one-time investment cost of between $6.5 and $12.6 million, and of course those will be subject to detailed business case development. The Deloitte LLP report establishes a valuable cornerstone to initiate significant change across our organization. In addition to the specific opportunities, it identifies broader themes required for success, including the continued evolution and transformation of the city's service and performance culture. Deloitte report identifies the need for a transformation office to drive the change that is required to reach our efficiency goals. and the Transformation Office is expected to be fully operational by the end of Q1 2022. Administration will return to Council in January of 2022 with a detailed plan in terms of how we will execute and report on those prioritized opportunities. So, Administration, we want to extend our thanks to Deloitte for their excellent work. An efficiency review is a healthy part of any corporation's operations, and we're confident that the work ahead of us will help ensure Regina residents will receive maximum value for their tax dollar. The work that Deloitte has led has been a collaborative discussion and process involving our administrative team, and of course Deloitte has I think pushed us fairly hard as an organization, and obviously they'll walk through their detail in their report. So as Deloitte concludes their work, we remain committed to improving and becoming a more modern, productive organization that provides residents with the services that, number one, they depend on, but it needs to be done in an efficient and cost-effective manner. And with that, I will turn it over to the Deloitte team, Matthew Cawley, Anthony Hamer, and Shelley Spence, and they also have some colleagues that are in Regina. I'll let them introduce the rest of their team. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So, as Chris has mentioned, my name is Matt Cawley. I am a partner at Deloitte. I'm a national partner that focuses on serving the public sector. I've been working with municipalities for the past 17 years. I've also worked in a municipality before as well. And I'm joined by two associates that are going to be presenting with me today. So I have Tony Hamer to my right, and he was an advisory partner on the engagement and co-led the engagement with me. And I have Shelley Spence on my left, who is an engagement director and was responsible for ensuring that we met the outcomes that we had committed to the city. As Chris had mentioned, in the gallery today, we do have our engagement manager, Orion Lovequist, who is from the Regina, and Kathy Warner, who is a local partner here that has been supporting us through this engagement. Before I begin, I just would like to, I'd like to start with thanking the city staff and the city management in particular in terms of the support that they've provided us during this engagement. We've been working with the city for the past 5 months on this engagement, and their efforts have not gone unnoticed on our part. They were always responsive to our requests. We're very engaged in this process, and so it was exactly what we were wanting to see. So we do want to thank the city management and the staff for their efforts and the ideas that they contributed to our work, and as well as working with us to validate some of these opportunities. So thank you very much to the city staff. So in terms of what we want to cover off today, we'd like to start with just going a reminder on the background and approach. We did present this in front of Executive Committee of Council back in July, but we will go through our background and approach again quickly for just a reminder. We really want to get into, though, the meat of our discussion in terms of our opportunities for improvement. As has been outlined, there are 14 opportunities that we think the city should be focusing in on. That we think are top priorities moving forward. And then we're going to talk about how the city actually moves forward in terms of implementing and working on these opportunities, and then obviously conclude with a question and answer period as well. So in terms of our background and approach, we conducted the engagement over 5 phases in total. The first phase we called Phase 0, which was selecting the services for review. So when we took on this engagement, the services that we would review were not defined, and so we had to work with the city and come back to Executive Committee of Council to get approval in terms of what were the services that we would be looking into. The first phase of our work began in August, and we really started focusing in on understanding the services. And we'll talk a little bit about the lenses with which we sort of looked at understanding these services. The second phase then occurred in September and into October, which was identifying the opportunities. And then once we had identified the opportunities, it was more than what would be reasonable to consume all at once. And so we had to prioritize those opportunities to make these opportunities actionable moving forward. And then our final phase was really about focusing in on the implementation plan and preparing our final report and communicating the outcomes of our engagement. Our approach really focuses in on a digital focus to service delivery reviews And so we did look at the services through a couple of different lenses. First being the service lens, second being financial lens, third being digital lens, and then fourth, stakeholder lens. So when we get into what these lenses actually mean in the context of each of the services, a service lens really is about understanding what's the rationale, why are you providing the service, right? And what are the outcomes that you're actually trying to achieve, right? The financial lens is really about understanding what is the financial cost, what are potential revenue generation opportunities, things like that could be focused in on. A digital lens was understanding what digital technology is available that's currently being used by the city, or potential options that were out there for the city to utilize. And then finally, and just as importantly, stakeholder lens. So understanding who are the stakeholders to the services. So not only the citizens that are delivering the services, but special interest groups, employees, council as well. So understanding who are the stakeholders and what would their views be on some of these services. So in terms of each of these phases, what we actually ended up doing in terms of phase 0, we ended up coming up with a selection criteria and developing a weighting process and developing a heat map to rank the services. So we worked with management through that. We discussed the rankings with ELT and with the Efficiency and Recovery Task Force as well. And then we assisted the city and came to a collaborative conclusion in terms of what were the services that were most likely to give the best bang of the buck for the city in terms of our work. In terms of understanding the services, we had a significant number of meetings with managers and directors that were actually delivering the services to understand the services from their perspective. We met with other teams like the infrastructure and innovation and renewable teams. We met with counselors as well, and we developed service profiles and really focused in on a financial aspect, but also the outline or the outcomes from that. And then what we developed was a baseline and looked at over 150 documents to develop those service profiles. In terms of when we got into the identification of opportunities, so this was a lot of the work that Deloitte really focused in on was basically coming up, what are the opportunities that we think are out there based on the work that what we'd heard in the meetings, what we know in terms of what other municipalities are doing out there, what are the best practices that we've seen. And so we held 6 work driver meetings. So with each of the departments that were selected for review, we actually sat down with each department and understood what was causing what were they spending their time on, right? What was causing their time, effort, and money, right? What was that being put towards? We analyzed a lot of data. We visited some sites as well. We had to have clarification meetings with managers to make sure that we were understanding, what we were seeing and making sure that we were getting some validation at that point as well. We had some discussions with external stakeholders as well, and then we had what we called opportunity review meetings. And so we sat down with staff and we said, here are the opportunities that we think might work, and we collaborated with staff to understand what their perspectives were on that, so that we could have an informed basis in terms of our conclusion from their perspective. This process identified 53 opportunities that we thought were valid and were appropriate for the city to look into moving forward. So 53 opportunities is quite significant, and so what we ended up doing was we had to prioritize those opportunities, and so we ended up holding workshops with each of the departments and with the executive leadership team to basically define what are the big items that the city should be focusing in on and what is the best bang for the buck. And then in terms of preparing the final report, we did meet again with the task force to provide them an update in terms of where we were landing in terms of our opportunities and conclusions, and we've developed this final report, and they're here today presenting the outcomes. So now I'd like to turn it over to Tony to talk to the next slide. The clicker doesn't seem to be working here. There we go.
Thanks, Matt. So in terms of the baseline, the financial baseline for the work, we took 2019 to be the baseline year, which allowed us to avoid the impact that you might have experienced due to COVID-19. So the baseline year was 2019. When you look at the 6 services, there are a few things you need to consider. So first of all, there's a gross baseline number here, which is really the operating spend, which is about $114 million in 2019, plus the capital spend, because you can see from the numbers up on the board, facilities and roadways were highly capitally intensive in 2019. And because we're also looking at procurement, we need to add the procurement spend in as well. So the gross baseline number is the order of about 400 million, but when you take a look at the operating spend, so you need to take out the depreciation from that, which is about 13 million. So you would end up with about 100 million of operating spend in a baseline. Then when you look at the capital, about 80% of the capital is actually external spend, so that kind of is conflated with procurement. So you end up, in the end effect, with about a $328 million baseline number that the review really covered off. That excludes any overlap. A couple of other points I would make on the baseline would also be that really, when you look at what it actually is, it's predominantly employment costs, salary and employment spending, and third-party spend. There are some other bits and pieces in there in addition to depreciation, but really if you're going to examine the baseline in detail, you're going to look at labour very closely, and you're going to look at procurement very closely. That's goods and services, because that's where the money goes. Reference the baseline. Back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Tony. So in terms of the opportunities for improvement, there's 3 main themes that we want to highlight before we get into the specific opportunities for improvement. And these are themes, overriding themes that came out through our review that we just, at a high level, if you were to take this away, these were the 3 things that we would want you to remember and think of. So the first theme really is about a service culture. And so what we mean by that really is, when we went through and understanding the service profiles, what we found was that in developing the service profiles, there wasn't sort of that focus in terms of understanding, who are we providing these services to, what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? How do we constantly try to improve those outcomes? So it's that outcome focus that I think we're really looking for in that service profile. And, there would be some staff that would absolutely have a great understanding of that, but not necessarily open conversations or a daily conversation about how to improve outcomes. And so, from our perspective, we think that there would be great efficiency gained if the city constantly talked about the services that they're performing, the outcomes that they're trying to achieve, and the stakeholders that are being impacted, right? And so that, we think, is a very important thing that needs to be ingrained in terms of the culture moving forward at the city. The other theme the second theme that we would cover off that we'd say needs some work is obviously performance culture. So there are metrics that are absolutely utilized by the city and are, interesting metrics and some good. But, when we think about performance culture, we usually use the term key performance indicator, right? And so having concrete conversations about how do you actually improve performance, and how do you measure it, and is it an appropriate measure? So when you have a key performance indicator, you want a concentrated thought in terms of what am I measuring, how is it improving outcomes, and how are we going to hold people accountable, and how are we going to hold the services accountable to achieving and improving those KPIs. And so we did not see a whole lot of conversations around KPIs. We saw a lot of metrics that were used, but not in that focused way in terms of, how do we actually improve performance, and are we actually being measured against some of those metrics. It also does wonders in terms of defining the expected outcomes and ensuring that the inputs that you're actually putting into a service actually are being related to the outputs that you're trying to achieve, or the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. And so from our perspective, these 2 key themes are extremely important in terms of what needs to change moving forward at the city in order to achieve some of the efficiencies that we're recommending in our report. The third key theme is really around a transformation office. And so when we're talking about performance culture and service culture and some of these opportunities, the city really does, this really steers the city towards, a transformation. And so, in order to be effective in terms of implementing the recommendations in this report, we really believe that there should be a dedicated focus group of individuals that are really, geared towards driving the change that is actually needed. And there needs to be accountability in terms of the office, reporting, preferably directly into council, and administratively being, within the city manager's office, to ensure that they have the wide reach and accountability that is needed to affect the change that is expected. And so we believe that there needs to be a clear vision in terms of the mandate, and obviously needs to have clear lines of responsibility and authority in order to execute the job that is ahead. And so these three key themes are extremely important, and so there's details that we have behind these, but these are the three themes that we would articulate to you as being really instrumental in terms of driving the change that we believe will benefit the city moving forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shelley to talk about the 14 opportunities.
Thank you, Matt. And through the chair, I'd like to discuss the 14. I'll start with the first three service groups that I reviewed. Matt already discussed the establishment of the Transformation Office, and this is the number one foundational opportunity that we see. It's difficult to come up with what the efficiency gain would be, but we definitely know that an investment here is fundamental to the rest of what we're talking about. The second foundational one is really implementing a modern CRM system, and we know that this is in play currently, but it's taking that service and performance culture and driving it through the CRM as well to ensure that you are looking at things from a citizen first point of view, and being able to track how requests and things move through the city. Modern CRMs are very, very key, and again, it's an investment, but it's going to pay back throughout the whole organization. And lastly, for foundational, we're talking about clarifying those service definitions. So what we see is if you can actually look at a service from beginning to end, regardless of the department that it lands in. So sometimes you use facilities or fleet in other departments as part of that service. Like a park going out uses a parks worker, uses a truck to water, and that's part of fleet. So just kind of looking at the service as opposed to the department and understanding the costs associated with those and the outcomes that you're looking toward is very valuable information in driving that performance culture and understanding what looks good and how well are we doing. Moving on to the parks opportunities, two of them came out that were key, and both of which we'd like to pilot in the parks department and then move out to the rest of the organization. The first is a scheduling software. So scheduling and deploying park resources, both people and equipment and fleet, et cetera, through a software will help understand how long does it take to do something, where is everyone, and what are they doing, and are we doing things efficiently? So getting that tool in place is not just for parks, it's something that we would bring over to other departments, but rolling it out first in parks will help with understanding, how is it going to work for this city. The second one is the KPIs, which Matt already discussed. So piloting the KPIs in parks first, and then taking lessons learned and moving them out to, again, other departments later on, will be very helpful in understanding productivity, linking them with all of the other, with performance culture. Procurement. Tony mentioned procurement as being, again, a foundational kind of, it's a service line that you don't have a big budget for, but they spend a lot for other departments. So that's why we chose them, and that's why we came up with some of the bigger efficiency gains through this work. The first one is improving procurement approaches. So taking a look at who are you buying from, what are your vendors like? Is it a vendor where there are a dime a dozen and you can really work at picking the best one, or is it some vendor that is very specialized and so your ability to negotiate with them is a little more lax? So that's what the approach that we're talking about around improving procurement approaches deals with. The second one here is revising the procurement contract terms. So the city has moved towards negotiating contracts, but there's some other key elements of taking a look at those contracts, so early payment discounts, looking at longer-term contracts, performance clauses within certain procurements. So if you hire someone to do something as a third party, holding them accountable for the service level that they are supposed to be providing you, holding them accountable for the cost of that contract is very key and can be, again, a big savings. And lastly, taking a look at consolidating low-value purchasing. This is an opportunity that I think any municipality could do. If everybody's running around and buying pencils in different departments, maybe we need to talk to a vendor that sells pencils and buy them as a whole for the city. It's a silly example, but it is really taking a look at high volume, low dollar procurements and seeing if there are better ways to secure that information and supply it. And with that, we'll move to the next one.
Thanks, Shelley.
And I will pass it over to Tony to discuss the next three services. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelley. Yeah, so let's look at number 9 first, the operator damage to city equipment. $568,000 worth of damage in 2019 and about $750,000 in 2020. I think the issue there really is that the investigation processes aren't really standardised. They're not generally applied similarly across the entire organisation. So if you do that, you investigate a bit more closely, you put people up on notice that it's going to happen, they need to be a bit more careful, they are trained, then you'll see some reduction from that. I think when you combine 9 with the telematics opportunity, which is number 10, I think you've got more of a chance of reducing the damage when the telematics are fitted, because you'll know when the damage occurred, when it occurred, where the asset was, how it was being driven, if it was being driven. So I think people will naturally become a lot more aware of their driving style and their care of the assets when the telematics are fitted. So I think that's not too difficult to do, and we'll show you the plan for that a little bit later. On number 10 on the telematics, you have telematics fitted to about 70 assets in the fleet already, and the transit fleet has GPS. But you don't really analyse the data yet from the 70 units that have telematics fitted. So you're missing an opportunity there to really kind of drive reductions in the fuel bills and the maintenance costs. The fuel costs in 2019 were about $6.5 million, and the maintenance costs were about $17 million. Because you don't really have any analysable data from the telematics, and it's not fitted to all asset classes, we took some what we know to be generally strong rules of thumb for estimating the benefits there. So typically when you fit telematics to a fleet in certain classes, you'll usually find that about 10% of the assets aren't required. You can probably green about 30%, and the operating reductions are up to about 13% on the fleets. And it depends on the nature of the fleet. So we could see savings here in the order of over $1 million on fuel and maintenance costs once the telematics are in place, and that's net of the sort of ongoing analytics. Standard practice is to outsource the analytics to a third-party provider like Geotab. They'll do that service for you, so you don't have to employ extra people to do that. It's kind of part of the service. I think a couple of other comments I would make on this one would be that when we talk about the civic maintenance opportunity next, if you reduce the cost of your maintenance operation, then the savings in telematics will be less, because you've already taken the saving on the maintenance operation. But there's still, I think, plus a payback. So I think that's quite a strong option, number 10. On the civic maintenance side, interesting. So I did visit the civic maintenance shops and had lots of conversations with managers and the directors. And on the transit shop, you've done quite a lot of work. So you've implemented some lean type approaches. You've got some well-enforced and well-managed time standards. There's more that you could do, but the transit shop's actually quite well run. And I think management's recognised the issue in the civic shops, and they've brought a manager over to kind of help address that, and he's working through some of the issues now. The real problems there are really that you don't really enforce any time standards yet. So work's taking, from my observations, longer than it probably needs to. And I've got some examples in the report that I could talk to, but generally I think the lack of measured time standards, reporting, control over the labour is a bit of an issue in those shops. And I'm saying here that the benefit might be 20%. It could actually be higher. Once you start digging into the details, you might find that. So 20%, would I say it's conservative? It's probably towards the lower end. Work needs to be completed to confirm that. Number 12, introduce a ratchet to limit asset replacements when budgeting. So this is about introducing tension into the system. It appears in fleet because I've used the fleet example or some fleet assets as an example. The idea here is that you would, as part of the budgeting process, you would gradually reduce the number of assets that are available to the services. You do it in collaboration and with warning and with notice. But it may be, for example, that if you have 10 light-duty pickup trucks needing to be replaced in 3 years' time, the service is only going to get 9. And the service is going to have to figure out how to operate with fewer assets and still deliver the service. It's a way of inserting some tension into the system to help drive continual improvement and continual productivity. And the numbers in that opportunity really are just based around a certain class of trucks. There were 82 trucks, and about 1/3 of them, I think, had less than 5k per year in terms of distance on them. So if you can work a way to squeeze that asset class down and other asset classes, and even the labour as well, if you want to go in that direction, you can probably put tension in the system and really drive home efficiency gains, but you've got to build it into the budgeting process. So that's number 12. The facilities side, I mean, so the facilities group has instituted utility monitoring on 50 of the city buildings. So the idea there is that over time you'll gather data on utility usage, and you'll either improve the routine maintenance processes to fix that air compressor, that air conditioning unit that's taking too much power, or you'll put sort of remote controlled lighting on, or you'll manage the temperatures a little more closely and more carefully. And so we reckon that it's not a huge saving there, and it might take a while to get, but nevertheless it's worth considering. And the roadways one at the end really is, again, it comes back to the procurement piece. I mean, we looked at the top 10 contracts, and there's overages on a number of them, so taking a discount on the overage, just a couple of percent, is worth having. There, and as would be a sort of a 2 for 10 early payment discount if you want to go in that direction. So the idea would be you'd take a 2% or thereabouts discount where you can negotiate that for a 10-day payment. That may require you to improve the accounts payable process. We haven't looked into details there because if you're going to go on a 2 for 10 basis, you've got to be able to meet your commitment, which will be a sort of a 10-day payment. So there's definitely something in that. Again, just to echo Shelley's point, the city is big, but it's not omnipotent. So there will be certain suppliers that provide services to the city who have more negotiating power than you do. Some will play ball, some won't play ball. So, but I think you've got a very good chance of, if you pay an interest, you'll see quite significant productivity gains or efficiency gains on the procurement side in roadways too. So I'm just going to touch upon the 53 just for a minute or two. The 14 that we just described to you, and I'm not going to try and kind of pass the eye test that's on the screen because it's all in the report, but I'll just pick on 5 or 6 of the opportunities that are on the long list but aren't on the short list, and I'll just explain why they are where they are. So there's a nice one on facilities, which is around compressing the, which again is around the long-term contracts. It didn't figure it into the top 14, but again, if you're going to action procurement, you'll action it for roadways, for facilities across the piece. So you'll probably see that naturally come through in the procurement numbers, so it doesn't need to be addressed separately. There's an interesting one on the space allocations in this building. Some of the floors haven't been refitted. You could go in that direction. The savings aren't huge and the investments are quite high and the optics aren't great. If the first thing you do from an efficiency review is refit your offices, it's kind of a strange message. So I probably wouldn't head in that direction early on. There's some KPIs to be applied potentially to IT, another interesting one. And down from there, I mean, the roadways piece, and Shelley mentioned it on the previous slide, but too. If you're going to introduce scheduling and closer labour control, get it to work in parks first, then spread it to roadways. You'll need to kind of work together because you're going to want to run the same kinds of systems so that you can look ahead in time and you can look across departments to sort of say, well, you know, if you're going to go here and fix this, then you can fix that over there while you're here because it's not due for 2 months, but you might as well do it today while you're there. Those sorts of decisions you'll be able to take with those sorts of systems in place. And then you could do a bit more on the transit side. Lots of good work's been done there already. So if you were to think about how you've actually set those labour standards, I would be taking the non-value added work out of the assignments and putting it into separate jobs. Because it means it's easier to control the labour when the labour's doing what the labour's supposed to be doing and not other stuff. So there may be more benefit to be had there, but good work's been done already. I'd leave it there, I think, Matt, for now.
Tony, if I could just add a couple of points
Yeah.
as well to the 53. And I'll be brief. You'll note that none of the information technology points made it to the 14. And the reason for that is IT is going to need to be involved in many of the 14 already. IT doesn't have a big spend on their side, but they do support the city with all of the systems that are in place. So if you look in our report, you will note that we have put an asterisk next to the opportunities that will involve a great deal of IT support and also that transformational office support. And lastly, there are a few more in parks that, the telematics and stuff that are being done in the other departments. Just like I said with KPIs and with scheduling, starting in parks and moving its way through to other departments, some of those other opportunities will move their way back into parks. So I just wanted to point that out, that we did choose the best department to try and pilot some of the opportunities and recommendations first before they move on. And that's why they were not selected into the top 14. Back to you, Matt. Actually, I think back to me.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the implementation roadmap, as you can see in the report, everything is starting Q1 2022. And as the city manager, Chris, has mentioned, they will be coming back to council with that implementation plan at that time. One of the key things with the foundational ones is that we do really need to get started on them, including the transformation office and getting that fully functional by the end of the first quarter. The implementation of the CRM is a little bit longer of a burn just because it is a system selection. And you'll note with anything that is a system selection, you really need to gather what do we want the system to do, your requirements, then go to market and see what the vendors have. And so it's a process that takes a little bit of time. And then implementing the actual system and getting it up and running is again, not a small task, but it does take some time. The clarifying service definitions can start right away. Again, recommending that we start with one department and roll out to the rest. And this does work very closely with your finance group, because if we're looking at service costing, we need to work with them on understanding the cost of the services. So we do want to say that, clarifying the services for the top 14 would probably be your first step. Then go to big spending, citizen-focused services, and then others. And so we could start with those first ones in the first 6 months or so. In parks, building the plan, the business case, and the technology map for the scheduling software, as I mentioned for CRM, it does take a bit of time, and therefore it's a little bit of a longer process there. And the KPIs is something that we could do in the first 3 quarters of next year for parks, and as mentioned, rolled out to other departments once we've got a good process in place. Procurement, immediately begin with that commodity strategy and looking at supplier performance, and immediately start looking at the contract terms. You start with legal, then you are going to add those terms. This takes a little bit longer because there's contracts in place. So obviously you're not going to change the contracts that are already out there, but you can get the shell and the model ready and get the businesses understanding what needs to be negotiated, and then roll it out as you go. And then with consolidating the low value purchasing, there has been some work done already and by procurement, and just giving some more work plan and project plan to that, looking at P cards, looking at low value procurements under 75,000, looking at the data and analyzing it, and then seeing where we can approach vendors for better consolidated purchasing. So next slide, and over to you, Tony.
Yeah, so I'll take them one by one. So number 9, I mean, you could get that done in a few months. There's no reason why it should take any longer than that to just drill into the detail in what's going on, fix the governance, define the processes, and make sure that it's complied with. And it does go hand in hand with telematics, which is the next one. I mean, again, that's doable within a year, as long as the technology department's happy to support and you can wire everything in. The third-party providers such as Geotab, and there are others available, they do this for a living in millions and millions of vehicles, globally. So you wouldn't be the first to take that one on. So I'd start by analysing the data you've currently got, and then just work through the asset classes where you're going to kind of drive bang for your buck. So the trucks first, and then to the transit fleet probably next, and just kind of work that through. The civic maintenance operations, the new manager's been in probably for 3 or 4 months now. He did the job partially, at least, in the transit shop. So he probably needs a shot in the arm just to kind of get ahead of the curve there and get things running. So that's easily doable within a year. The ratchet or the tension in the systems are a little more complex. I mean, you've just published a budget, so you're going to be in the next budgeting cycle for that. So I'd want to be sort of fixing up how that's going to work in the next 3 to 6 months, and then rolling it out for the next budget. You'll need to understand, what sort of support you are going to ratchet down or wind down there to encourage improvement. The monitoring of the utilities is underway, so you just need to carry on with that, but just not forget to monitor the data, analyse the data, and then take action on the back end. So, there may be some things to fix there. The facilities maintenance processes are pretty well run. Some of them have actually got good KPIs on them, so I've got faith that work will probably get done quite well. And then the long-term contract and vendor management piece, I mean, Shelley's really spoken to that. You need to address that around the sort of aspects of the Kraljuk model, which really depends on where your power is in the relationship and the type of procurements you're making. But if you go down that route, you'll be able to do that as well, potentially. I think on the last couple of bullets on the slide, I mean, Shelley spoke to the IT service not really having any opportunities on the list, and there's good reason for that, and that's been outlined already. But I think one thing you do need to do is just stand back from this and really consider whether you've got the required resources and expertise in-house to get this stuff done to that kind of timeline. So I think that's a consideration to be had over the next couple of weeks. And then I would want to see the transformation office really driving the implementation plan completion, 30, 60, 90-day sprints for some of these, and sort of really helping to drive action there in tandem with the ELT and the directors.
So with that concludes our presentation. So we'd like to thank the Executive Committee of Council for their attention during our presentation. We turn it over to the Chair for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we start with the questions, I do want to remind members of Executive that with delegations, you ask questions, you don't make preamble to a question, repeat any question previously asked, or debate with the delegation. Section 16, subsection 11A of the procedural bylaw. So, do we have any questions? All right, Councillor Mancinelli.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the report. I was wondering if you could expand on the civic fleet maintenance examples you gave for the oil changes and the time spent in the shop.
Yeah, so I'll take that one, Matt. Yeah, so I came up, I think it was late September. I think I visited all of the civic shops. And in discussion with the manager of the civic shop, I think there were some maintenance intervals, oil changes on Volvo trucks are being done a bit too frequently, was one. Then we saw some examples of oil changes that were probably taking closer to 2 hours. Same with the tyre change. And while that's not conclusive proof that the shops, management could be improved, when you add it together with the lack of the sort of application of the time standards and the monitoring and control, you have to conclude that there's an opportunity to be had in those shops. I think when you look at the structure of the shops as well, they're all kind of a bit private. So it's hard to manage them visually. You're not going to put cameras in, so you really do need the time standards to help you control what gets done, within a reasonable time.
Okay. Not being able to do that, I've looked at the benchmarking that's provided through municipal benchmarking. It doesn't really reflect exactly what's being said. Can you have any comment on why that might be?
Well, again, so the municipal benchmarking it's kind of useful to a point. So the way I read that would be that the light and the medium trucks are a bit more expensive to maintain than the peers. Whereas the heavy-duty and transit fleet, the transit fleet in particular, is actually a little bit lower than the peers. So to my mind, the fact that those costs are a little bit higher than I might have expected kind of leads me to conclude that when I triangulate that with the observations and the lack of standards, that there's probably tightening to be done in the civic shop.
Okay. First stepping in, watching the benchmarking, transit was a little bit of an outlier with the new facility, as you've commented as well. It really cleaned up. Noticing the time loss for transportation and facilities for performing repairs and maintenance was a big piece of it. Is the civic portion suffering a similar problem with allocation of space or resources?
I'm struggling to hear you. I do apologise.
I'm sorry?
I'm struggling to hear what you're saying. It's really muffled.
Sorry, it's this mask.
Yeah, it doesn't help.
When I first stepped in, transit was in a similar situation with its resources being used to move vehicles around to be worked on instead of actually being worked on because of the different points of the shop.
Yeah.
Different shops, different places, a lot of manpower lost. Is this civic portion suffering from similar circumstance in any way?
It's an interesting question. I mean, transit buses are hard to move around. You know, they're quite big, so it's good if you can have like a nice linear flow in a single building for those. I mean, you look at the sort of state of the buildings. I mean, they're not great, but they're not that bad. I'm not sure I'd be rushing out and building a new maintenance facility anytime soon. I'd have a go at the labour and parts control first, probably. See where I can get to with that. And if there are any structural limitations on the buildings at that point, then I might be thinking about the business case for like a new build or a rebuild somewhere. Mm-hmm. I didn't look in detail at the flows, to be perfectly honest, just kind of in the shops. So it's something that you might want to think about when you kind of run the numbers. So if you don't, you might end up with more ancillary jobs than you probably like. I'd roll the non-value added work into not into the technicians, into other roles. So if you find that you have too many of those, then at that point you might think, well, maybe I want to do a new build or modification to the shops.
Yeah, I'm not rushing out to build.
Sorry?
It's not rushing out to want to build at all.
No.
A question. You mentioned telematics many times in the presentation and the efficiency it brings. With the attention paid to parks, I noticed that the telematics isn't being applied to the parks right away, but with redoing scheduling and monitoring data, I'm wondering why that is like that. I thought it would be a real benefit to have in parks as we're putting the attention towards it.
Well, so maybe the presentation is not as clear as it could be, but so the telematics appears in fleet because it's kind of a fleet issue. But I would start with probably with the pickup trucks first, which is where you normally see typically the higher savings. So whoever runs a pickup truck is going to get telematics. Okay. I don't mind whether they're in parks or roadways or anywhere else. It's really driven. They're typically different savings by different asset classes around sort of fuel and maintenance. So I'd start with those asset classes first. Then I'd roll up maybe a little bit later on to those that don't yield such large benefits. So you may well find that, I'm sure Parks has pickup trucks. It would get telematics if that's the case, if you went in that direction.
Yeah, totally. I was thinking it was scheduling and moving around the city, it would be a boon. What about things like the mowers and the actual operations for what the parks does? Any case for that?
Sorry, could you speak up?
What about the mowers or the various pieces of equipment that's operated that way? Any case for telematics or any monitoring that way? Are there efficiencies or any measurement or fuel savings or any gain that way as they start to monitor?
So I could probably answer that. It is a step in the process. So if you're finding that there's a lot of efficiencies from those big trucks that are out there, sending out crews for pruning, for watering, etc., you have to do a cost-benefit analysis on putting those kinds of telematics on mowers. Certainly, probably not the hand mowers, but the ride-on mowers that are used, etc. So, really, starting with the big stuff. Doing the data analytics, seeing what efficiencies you're getting from that, and then if it is a great cost benefit, you would continue to push that down to the smaller equipment that is being used.
Thank you.
All right, I have Councillor Bresciani next.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you very much for this information. It's exciting to hear some different ways to look at different ways we can improve our city. I want to just start back on Councillor Mancinelli's question about fleet. We, in turn, turn over our fleet over so many years. Rare to see a city truck. They look very new. Is it very common practice that it's you know, I don't know if it's every 5 years, every 7 years. Did you research that to see, is that common in other municipalities as well? Do we turn them over quicker, or is it around the same?
If you don't mind, I'd let Dorian Wanzura, who's on the phone, just answer that question. Dorian, are you able to speak?
Yes, Tony, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thanks, Dorian.
Madam Chairman, thank you for the question. Typically fleet units are replaced on a condition base at an optimum point in their life cycle. Everybody's pretty familiar with new vehicles take very little maintenance. They're very operationally efficient, and as they age over time, repair costs go up, maintenance costs go up, that sort of thing. So there is a window that is, for light vehicles, probably in and around the 9 to 11 year mark, where that typically makes sense. But some of that's dependent on usage, annual volume of miles, hours, that sort of thing.
Thank you. Just to elaborate, though, with the City of Regina, did you find that that's what we were doing, is this the 9 to 11?
The city does track its operating maintenance costs and does make sort of its replacement decisions. But part of our focus was more around some of the telematics usage, low value usage units. There's a number that were utilized on a fairly low basis annually that should get looked at for rationalization, reduction in your overall number of fleet units versus what was the optimum replacement window. We did not do that in depth.
Okay, thank you for that. So as you talked about culture, and when we're looking at service culture and performance culture, two key pieces to running an organization. I'd like to just, if you could elaborate, how do we start changing this culture here? The City of Regina is a big beast, as we know. What did you find that, why is that culture the way it is, and how do we move forward on that? Through the chair.
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, from a culture perspective, there's a couple of points that I would like to make. First, I think whether you're doing a review like this, whether you're a citizen that's receiving the services, when something bad happens, that sticks out in your mind. It's reputational, right? And so we did, during our engagement, we heard about anecdotal evidence that had suggested that, that there wasn't really sort of the service mindset all the time, 100% of the time. Not to say that should be a broad sort of, or casted broadly across the city, but we saw enough of it that, we believe that there needs to be a focus on improving the culture from that perspective. In terms of how you move forward and how you execute on that, it starts with council, right? In terms of, wanting and outlining to management in terms of what is the expectation. Management has to be bought in, and we believe through the conversations we've had with management that they are absolutely focused in on improving the culture. Our recommendation in terms of a transformation office is a key point in terms of driving change. And this is change management is what's going to happen. I think the employees of the city are fantastic partners. They're key in terms of delivering the services. And so this is about empowering them to ensure that, every day that they go to work, they're proud of the work that they're doing, and they care about the citizens that they're serving or the businesses that they're serving. And so that has to come through change management. And so the transformation office is absolutely the first step, and the accountability of that office to make sure that the change that council expects is actually being executed, and that transformation office sits within the city manager's division.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, could I add a couple of points?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say, if you don't have tension in the system, in the budgeting system, then there's no real drive to do much differently, honestly, number one. And I think that needs to be injected, and I think it will be. I think if you don't understand the full service that you're participating, you don't know your part in that. So you're kind of a little bit lost, and that's That's an easy thing to say, and it might not be universally, applicable, because there are certain roles and certain aspects of the work that you kind of know what you do. Then I think if you don't have back to the point around labour and procurement, if you don't have time standards for where you can for certain types of work, you're going to get what you're going to get. Particularly if you don't measure and monitor the performance as well. And so I think, you need those things in place really to kind of begin to affect a change. And if you're going to affect the change, I would go narrow and deep to begin with. For example, in parks, I'd make it work somewhere, then I'd roll it out. I wouldn't do a sort of inch deep and a mile wide KPI development process or a time standard process. I'd make certain parts of the organisation properly function first, then I'd roll it out elsewhere. That's how I would actually do that and address that.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you. In regards to the transformation office, I'd like to know why is it important that would be direct reporting to council rather than going through administration?
Yeah.
Through the chair?
Yeah, and so through the chair, I guess, our perspective or thought on that is that I think administratively it has to sit within the administration, but I think council needs to, be aware of the changes that are happening, right? And so we think direct reporting of a transformation office will put the appropriate attention and focus in terms of ensuring that the changes are being met, right? And that councillors are aware in terms of how things are progressing. Because so often we see that transformation offices get established and sometimes they lack the authority to really drive the change that's needed within the city. Sometimes there's barriers that are in place. And so if that's not communicated effectively up through the entire governance of the city, then it will reduce the effectiveness of that office and the change that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you.
And if I can add to that, we were talking about the 30, 60, 90-day sprints in these projects. And I think that the reason why you do it in short periods with milestones is to show that you actually are achieving some of those things. Some of these are big pieces, and you need to break them down and have a win and show that you are achieving what you want to do going forward, and then build from that. And there's momentum that starts. And that helps with the change management as well as, look, we've gotten this far, and we've got this much to go, but we've gotten this far and we achieved. And then everyone sees that in a transparent fashion and feels good that, you're not just going to go away for 2 years and come back and hope it was done.
Great, yeah, no, thank you. One of the questions I had for parks a couple of years ago, and if you can just elaborate, was we have a lot of staff in parks, but to try and get the work done was a problem. So in my area, had lots of problems with parks. But what administration was also trying to do is work with the unions to say, we don't need more parks, but we need staff to work efficiently. But if staff don't want to work efficiently, they're saying, well, no, this is all we got. This kind of a system then coming in place would assist with that.
Exactly.
With the telematics. Is that
Yeah.
accurate?
Yeah, the performance culture, like the setting up KPIs, things like that will absolutely help drive efficiency, right? It will also, hopefully encourage city employees to, improve their own performance, right? Like, so they know that they're being measured against something, they know they're measured, they will want to beat and achieve that, right? And so that's the type of change that we're wanting to have. It's one thing to establish a KPI.
Yeah.
It's another thing for city employees to be bought in and really focused in on delivering on those KPIs.
And they need to be they need to feel part of that performance standard that they're being measured against, that they can control it. And the time standards kind of come into that too. So if you're going to go out to do something and it's supposed to take this long, how long did it take you? And if it took you longer, why? And the why could be because I saw another tree that needed to be pruned, or there was another tree that was dying, so I wanted to water that. That's the kind of civic pride that you want to instill, and that's a great reason to not meet your standard that day, because you did a bit more. You went over and above. And to kind of changing that mindset to help people understand what they're being asked to do, how long it should take, and the results of their work.
Okay.
Can I just add a couple of points?
Yeah.
I think if you think of it this way, really, the scheduling system allows you to kind of effectively schedule the work that gets done, so that you're not visiting the same place 5 yards away, the following day to do something slightly different. So you schedule the work well. You set reasonable time standards for repetitive work where you can. You can't do it for everything, but much of work you can set reasonable standards for. And there are kind of basic standards and so lookup tables for doing that kind of thing. That's straightforward enough. And you have to remember as well, we're in the modern age now. I mean, it's possible to do remote supervision using a telephone. You can do a video call that's held in Amazon Web Services or somewhere. You can actually supervise remotely. You can call problems in from the field remotely. You don't have to travel for 30 minutes in a truck to go and work out what's going on anymore. You can call ahead. You can check the site set before you go. There's so much you can do to drive performance that really, maybe even 3 or 4 years ago might have been prohibitively expensive. Well, no, it's not. So it really is schedule it right, supervise it well, set the standards, measure and manage performance. And I think they're the kind of keys really for that kind of remote field work.
Great, thank
Okay.
you. Last question, I'll let others ask. The maintenance of, just not the equipment, but monitoring the damage that is caused by, I'm in a new area, snow removal, they, hit sidewalks and blah, blah. Holding staff accountable for that, but also monitoring, which is key, which will come out of this. But I guess the last question is, in doing this whole review, what was, I guess, the most surprising, or I guess what were you more surprised about when you looked at the service levels as a whole?
Maybe I'll start through the chair, but I'll also let Shelley and Tony chime in on this. I think from my perspective, I mean, I'll say there's 2 surprises. So a good surprise and maybe more of the negative surprise. So the good surprise being the willingness and support in terms of the management team in particular, in terms of wanting to execute change, right? So that absolutely, we don't always see that. We don't get that buy-in 100% of the time. And so that was a pleasant surprise, I'd say. From a negative surprise in terms of service culture, I mean, I think really, from our perspective, I think it's the difference that we had between, our perspective in terms of metrics and KPIs versus, how a lot of the staff sort of viewed some of the metrics. So staff thought they had KPIs in place and things like that. And, we would call them more metrics and less tied to how, people can control performance, right? Which is really what we were focused in on. And so I think it's not uncommon to see that issue, but I think the amount of, the number of people that struggled to get that concept initially, I think was a bit of a negative surprise, I'd say, in my way. So,
I'd echo Matt's comments. I think the openness and the willingness and the candid conversations were actually quite refreshing. It doesn't always happen, so that was positive. I think on sort of, if I'm going to look at sort of slightly more negative side, I would say gluing the whole thing together needs a bit of work. You don't have some of the basic systems we'd like you to have, like your CRM and like your scheduling systems and those kinds of things, and you probably need them. And so while there's some great work being done in certain places around the facility side and in some of the transit shops and so on, there was also some kind of basic stuff that you just need to fix, which I would hope kind of would have been done. And I know it's kind of probably known, but it's getting around to doing it when you don't have the tension in the system, the measures and controls and all those sort of that kind of reporting. It means it often just gets left on the table because there's always something that's more urgent to be done, but kind of less critical for the long term.
And through the chair, if I could add my biggest surprise, and I think it's both a positive and a negative at the same time, was that when we have opportunities and ideas from other municipalities that we've worked with, and we bring them forward to the executive and management, and quite often the answer was, we are starting to do that. And in fact, they are, and that was a great surprise. The issue, I think, is that it needs some backing and some bones to it. Mm-hmm. So the transformation office will make it, a well-known project. Like the low value procurement's already being done. They're already talking to vendors to do, but it's a person in procurement that's working on that. So this elevates it to a point where it's a project where there's a team where there's resourcing, whether you need to go external or internal or however it's going to work. I think that there's some really great work going on by some really great people that are trying their best, but they just need a bit more support to get it done.
Great. Thank you for the work. It's very exciting.
Councillor Stevens.
Great, thank you. First question is about the constitution of the Transformation Office. There's a budget and amount tagged to it. Does that include seconding someone who already works for the city, staffing it internally, or hiring a consultant? Can you walk me through what that cost means?
Sure. Through the chair. The idea was to staff the office with the appropriate staff for a 3-year period. But also there is a portion of that investment that is for external consultants to support. But I think that from an economical point of view, you would want to either bring someone from within into that position or hire into that position, because it's going to be a 3-year period, and having a consultant do it for you for 3 years is not cost effective. But having that consultant to provide any support around change management or project management and tools and skills from the background would be part of that.
Thank you. So to be determined in terms of exactly what that looks like.
Yes, right now we have FTEs with an amount and an amount for external support in that investment. That's how that was developed.
If I might just add a couple of points. I mean, I think the first job is to sit down and think a bit more. Once this is all kind of landed and been digested, is to work out exactly what it's going to do. I mean, some of those points are kind of well established now. I mean, it can help develop plans, it can drive progress, it can report, it can provide technical expertise, it can do a whole bunch of different things. And so I think we need to settle on that when the sort of response is developed to you. But there's a menu of things that it could do, and you might want to inject some external support into it to begin with, just to get it set up, and just kind of short circuit the month to a couple of the first 4 to 6 weeks to a week or two, just to get going.
Thank you.
But it is 3 years worth of investment, so it's equivalent to 4 or 5 people, equivalent FTE headcount.
Okay. Second question about the office. Continuous improvement, in theory, suggests that the whole organization is part of providing alternatives and solutions. To what extent can you advise on best practices to ensure the rank and file have a voice, and this isn't just a Taylorist-like exercise where management uses the clock to discipline workers? How do you ensure that everybody is welcome to be part of this transformation?
I wouldn't say it's a Taylorist exercise to discipline the workers, first off, but I would say that improvement happens on about 3 different levels in organisations. There's a kind of bigger transformational type stuff that you need to run centrally, and you kind of know where you're going to go. Then there's a sort of departmental driven objectives and development sort of work that you do there. And then you've got this, and then within those 2 contexts, it is good to involve the managers, the workers around developing the time standards, developing better ways to do those kinds of things. And you can run sort of improvement teams. You can do they're called Kaizen events in some industries. You can do them for 4 to 6 hours at the start of a shift. You can do them and they might last a couple of weeks when you focus on a certain aspect. So I think if you use the Transformation Office to think through those kinds of layers in the approach and to set that sort of activity in play, you can then work out within that context where you'd like to focus certain aspects of the work and the workforce to really think through those kinds of contributions. Because often, honestly, the people on the tools, they've got some great ideas for doing stuff differently.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, all right.
The report speaks about potentially closing inefficient buildings. Could you comment a little bit more on where they might be located in the city? Are we talking about old hockey rinks, maintenance facilities, and so on?
I'd pass that one over to Dorian, assuming that he's still on the call. I'd say that we explored that, but we didn't explore it in immense detail in the end event. Dorian, can you take that one?
Yeah, certainly, Tony. Madam Chair, to answer the question, as Tony said, we didn't look in detail. We know there has been some reference to civic facilities, recreation facilities that have been looked at in the past for rationalization. We wanted to flag that for you again. But really, when you start thinking about facilities, occupancy load, the city's GHG targets, a significant part of your GHG inventory will be around facilities, occupied facilities. So making sure you're looking at reducing footprint, making sure they're efficient. The facilities you do have and are using are efficient for use and environment reasons is important. We didn't go into a deep look in terms of running through all of the civic facilities, but in general, that's the approach, Councillor.
Okay. Thank you.
I think and again, we did have long conversations on space standards, gross and net, and the possibility of, in some cases, remote working, which is kind of established during the COVID period as well. So it became apparent that the facilities function has got its arms around those sorts of things, and I think that's the sort of improvement you could manage at that sort of non-transformational next level down. The issue you've got is that refitting facilities isn't inexpensive, often. So if you're going to, with the exception maybe of some well-trodden paths in the city that I know have been around for a while, we didn't see anything obvious that could just be kind of shut down. So you're into space compression. When you space compress, you have to refit. That comes with a cost. And the paybacks typically aren't that short. You tend to keep the facilities for a long time, so they're typically long paybacks with the refits. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Outsourcing features in the report and in some of the recommendations. So I have two questions about that. How do we maintain accountability for services provided by those outsourced vendors? I get complaints about those companies all the time.
Yeah.
It's difficult to ensure that they perform. And secondly, you mentioned this in the consultation. How do we prevent lowball offers, getting you the contract, and then things spiral out of control? Is that to be assumed in the performance metrics?
Well, so a couple of things then, I suppose. Well, outsourcing does figure as a potential option, and there are a couple that I said I helped to draft. I mean, the civic shop, I'd be looking at everything I could do to improve it and keeping it in-house first, honestly. And then I'd look at the margin that's left in there with respect to the private sector. And I'd make a call as to whether I'd rather keep control over that or not. And I'll address the second point in a second. And then when it comes to outsourcing sort of building operators and cleaners and so on, honestly, it's like you could, but it's not a huge return, honestly. And it comes with an awful lot of other issues as well. You know, and so I think there are some that you could do, but I'd probably be doing other things first and taking other paths first. If I couldn't get what I wanted through the productivity improvements, then I might move to an outsourcing potential. Now, I think then it depends on the amount of control that you have and then the amount of competition there is in the marketplace for the services you're outsourcing. So if you're going to outsource something that, you know, once it's gone, you can never bring it back, you lose all the expertise, and you're then in the hands of an unscrupulous contractor, if there are any, then you have a problem, particularly if you can't go anywhere else. So you have to be very, very careful about outsourcing strategic items or strategic services that really where there's no competition in the marketplace. If you're pretty confident that there's a competitive marketplace for a service, then you can probably, you know, with a little more surety, think about outsourcing certain services and, at that point. But I'd be wanting to lock into longer-term contracts and maybe put some escalators in there that ideally limit the increases that are allowed to happen, unless the market is on its head, like it is for resin at the moment, for example, whereby, you know, no supplier is going to give you a commitment out further than about a month. So you have to really look at each case and really consider it on the merits of the relationship you have with the suppliers. And you also need to retain some expertise in procurement in-house, to be able to manage those contracts and understand those commodities and those services as well, and in other services too.
Yeah, I would just, through the chair, I just would focus in terms of answering that question. The procurement side is extremely important. The legal, the contract itself, in terms of how services are defined and expectations within that contract. If you actually do go down the path of outsourcing, you need to make sure that that contract is well thought of ahead of time, because whoever the company is that actually delivers on that contract is going to manage its risk to that contract to deliver the outcomes that are defined. So.
Thank you. My last question is about employee and labor relations. In some of these scenarios, perhaps there's a displacement of workers for whatever reason. Where does upskilling and ensuring that these workers have opportunities to do more value-added work, where does that feature into how we should take these recommendations further? Is it about making redundancies or actually about giving existing opportunities or existing employees new opportunities in the city?
I didn't quite get the first part of the question, but what I would say is that what we've done here is identify opportunities to improve efficiency. We sort of don't run the labour relations or the HR department in the city, and so it may well be that, you know, I haven't looked at the attrition rates or the retirement dates of certain groups yet, and it may be that some of those folks, if you do drive the efficiencies, are happy to move on. Maybe that some would like to be retrained to do different stuff. So I think all of those sorts of aspects could figure in how you kind of manage the execution and how you decide to sort of drive the benefits to the bottom line or not, as you sort of continue to operate the HR policies and run the business in general.
Thank you.
All right, I have Councillor Findura next.
Thank you, Madam
Go
Chair. Councillor Stevens asked the first question on the outsourcing, so that's done, out of the play. Second one is curious on the number 37 in your opportunities, compressed space allocation.
Yeah.
If you could just give me a little bit, I think I understand it. Can you give me a little bit more?
Yeah, and I'm struggling to remember the exact numbers. It's probably in the report, but I think you operate on about you have a standard for space allocation per employee in this building, for example. Then you've refitted some of the floors, and you've compressed the space allocation to a degree. You could technically compress the space allocation more, squeeze people into fewer floors, turn off the lights and heating in some of those floors, or possibly even you could even rent them out if your protocols allow for that. If you were to think carefully then about who actually needs to be on site to do their work and how much space they actually need, you may be able to get some more compression. It's a bit like one of those puzzles where, you know, all the squares and there's a space missing in the middle. You're trying to move everything around to get people into fewer buildings. If you're going to go sort of more remote working, you're going to have to sort of think about IT provision and how the general day would work as well. So it really is about compressing the footprint. You have a lot of shared space as well on certain floors, so there's some aspects that you might be able to think through there as well. The point that I made a little bit earlier is that doing that requires a refit. And when facilities organisations do refits, they typically upgrade things like air conditioning as well. So often the cost for the upgrade is more than you might think it is to bring everything not up to code, but at least up to expectations. So that's it's a complicated picture, that one, I think, to get to the bottom of. It's probably worth some investigation, but I think in my opening comments I wouldn't pick on that first off.
Okay.
I think there's money in it, probably, but I think it's longer term and probably longer payback.
Okay, thank you for that. So then one more, and I'll go into the, you talked of monitoring utilities. You spoke about, and I know that understanding what this is going to lead is the administration will come back with some certain things to see how they're going to achieve that. When you talk about monitoring utilities, how deep did you go into that?
So we know you have monitoring systems fitted to the 50 of the buildings now, and you're collecting data. We know typically, in consultation with our real estate group, typically what the savings you would expect to see on the utility bills when you institute that kind of monitoring and take the corrective actions. I think they're between about 7 and 9% of the utility bill, typically. What we don't know, of course, at the moment is what it's going to cost to execute that. There's some assumptions in there that I think in the notes that I made that if we assume that the top 10 assets consume about 80% of the power, which might or might not be off, there's about $100,000 per asset in there to kind of do some retrofitting and improve the maintenance. So, you know, that might be about right. It might benefit from some further work and some further analysis once you've got the data over time, and you've made some corrections to, as I mentioned, the air conditioning unit that doesn't function maybe as it's supposed to function, or you've introduced the motion activated light switches or whatever else you're going to do on those assets. It's not a huge saving, probably, but I think it's something that you could do because it's all kind of already in train.
Right, so just one more question. So your comment would be over a longer period of time, you will see some savings or some changes?
Yeah, I mean, you have to work out, so you have to monitor it. You have to look at why it's a bit higher than you might think that you would like it to be. And often you find it's down to the routine maintenance on some of the kind of energy-consuming hardware that you've got, or the lights get left on, or the heating's a bit too high. I know some of that's centrally controlled anyway. But, you know, just putting the monitoring in place doesn't do anything unless you analyse the data and take some kind of action on that. But typically, where you haven't done it before, you can expect to see sort of 7% at the bottom end. You'll understand more the shape of the Pareto curve on the consumption of power when you've collected the data for a while and you've looked at the spikes and the usage and so on.
Okay.
It's early days on that at the moment.
Madam Chair, thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
All right, I have Councillor Hawkins next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question may go beyond your remit, but I want to ask it anyway. You focused very intensively and interestingly on information, on data and digitization, telematics, measurement, KPI indicators. All of those are management techniques. There might be another focus that says, are the right procedures in place for delivering the product, for making the decisions along the line to deliver the product, or is the process just too cumbersome? Too many decision-making points, makes it too slow. Do you have any comment on the processes, procedures that we use to deliver services to citizens?
Yeah, so I'll start through the chair. So certainly in the work driver meetings that we held, we got into some of those processes. You know, what I would say in terms of some of the specifics on that, there is absolutely room for improvement that we saw in terms of making those processes more efficient. I think where we ended up having to go when we were in that level of detail, we did have to go higher level in terms of some of the bigger changes, because you're going to change processes and procedures around. You obviously need the buy-in of the staff who are executing on those processes and procedures to understand why those changes need to happen. And so, you know, from our perspective, there's absolutely room for improvement there, and it can, you know, we think that you'll have savings and efficiencies through that. They are kind of underneath the hood on a lot of these opportunities, is the way that I would characterize it.
And if I could add to that through the chair, in specific cases where the processes would need to change, one is around the consumer relationship management system. So being able to set up self-serve for citizens to be able to understand where their request is in the system, get that reporting back, not having to call one of you guys up to say, where's my request, if the system is working efficiently. And that system would also put together the work order, get scheduled in the scheduling system, get filled as a ticket and closed, and the citizen would then be aware. So that whole process and how that works would change. And another area where there's a bit of backlog in the process is around procurement. So one of the discussions that was part of the 53 was just ensuring that things are calendarized and that the workflow and the work levels within procurement are known and planned more than they are now. They already are, but trying to get the back and forth with contracting a little smoother, et cetera, will really increase efficiencies. So as Matt said, below the lid, there's a lot of process changes that would occur even with these 14 in a top level. And going back to the lenses that we do look at services, the digital is just one piece, but certainly stakeholders and finances, et cetera, are also part of those 14 opportunities.
If I might just make a couple of points as well. I think to the points to Councillor Stevens' question a little bit earlier, I mean, improvement does happen on different levels, and it may well be that some of this sort of the non-value added work in the execution processes in certain aspects will be a good candidate for some Kaizen teams to fix as you start to involve the workforce, for example. And there are other examples, to your point, Shelley, of where you could genuinely improve the process, likely, and the contract management piece, etc. So I think it's going to be there. The question, but to Matt's point, the work that we've done wasn't really into process mapping, process analysis, NVA analysis, and that kind of stuff. I take that to be something I'd bring in during the execution phase, and probably the next level down in the execution, around the sort of 3 levels and the 3 aspects.
Thank you. Those are helpful answers to me. And Madam Chair, I'd like to ask one final question that's a bit similar. Not much has been said about communication. I mean, communication between senior management and more junior employees who often have very good ideas, communication between departments to avoid silo problems, communication, because this is a complex organization, between elected officials and senior administrative officials. Those communication problems can pose barriers that frustrate the efficiency attempts that you're reaching for when we've talked about data and the use of data. Do you have anything to say about communication in this?
Yeah. So through the chair, in terms of that question on communication, it is a pillar of trust. And if you want to be an efficient organization, you have to have trust, right? And so that, communication starts with, council here and communicating its directions to management, and management, obviously, improving its communications or having its communications with the staff in terms of how, council sees the services that need to be delivered. So, from a communication perspective, we would absolutely agree that it is foundational in terms of achieving efficiency. The one thing I would caution on is, it's one thing to communicate, but you have to be very clear in terms of roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities, right? So there will be some people that don't like directions that are being taken, right? Don't like changes, and that if they're in a position of power, then they have, obviously the final say in terms of what should be done. But there are other people that need to be, there will be stakeholders, right, in terms of those decisions. And so ensuring that the communication is good between stakeholders and the decision makers is extremely important. But people need to know their roles and responsibilities as well, and they need to make sure that, what is their call to make and what is not, right? And so that's why, we really do think, particularly in the transformation office, that it be very clear in terms of its governance and who it's accountable to.
If I could add a couple of points. I think communication is great and it's important, but you need to understand why you're communicating and what you're trying to achieve. And I think it comes back to defining the services first. What's everybody's part in the game? What's the game plan? And therefore, what should you communicate about and what's really critical and important? And I think if you overlay the measurement on top of that, that would also sort of help drive behaviours and people to collaborate to get stuff done for the good of the city and the citizens. It's not perfect. I mean, there are lots of other things you can do to analyse information flows and electronic workflows and all that kind of good stuff. But fundamentally, it starts with, why are we here and what are we trying to do? And once that's clear, you then have the sort of communication landscape laid out and you can do some real communicating on it. You have to start there, I think.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your work.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Next, I have Councillor Shaw. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think I'm not going to duplicate questions. I'm going to try really hard. Thank you very much for all this work. It's exciting to see, especially being a new councillor, that this is stuff that we can implement right away to save taxpaying dollars, to save my taxes, and be resourced to products that we need and things that we can do better. I have a lot of questions. I know how we talk about external resources and contracting out and stuff like that. Where do you feel the city needs external resources to execute these recommendations, or do you feel that we need external resources to execute these?
Yeah.
Through the chair, sorry.
Yeah. So through the chair, we absolutely do feel that, so one, there is investments that need to be made in order to achieve those efficiencies. So that needs to be very clear, right? And I think you've picked up on that. In terms of how those investments are actually made, there's obviously prioritization that needs to happen internally. We do feel like there is investments that do need to be made. The top of the list is sort of the transformation office that we spoke about. And it's not so much as to staff it externally as so much as to provide advice in terms of, getting the right people in that office and having a change management focus and getting some advice that way. There are other opportunities on here that I think there are some specific investments that need to be made. If you think about it, the city staff, they do have day jobs right now. We noticed it during our work where, just trying to schedule meetings, people are delivering the services right now. And so there has to be some capacity that needs to be created for the existing staff so that they can focus in on, having these changes happen. And so there's a variety of ways in which that capacity can be made, one being through just reprioritizing and refocusing existing resources, but two, also getting external support in discrete areas.
We go back to consequences and KPIs and having just knowing how long it takes to do stuff. And I'm going to go back to my roots as running a mechanic shop. We have a little book that says if you need your oil change, it takes this many hours for this type of vehicle. And furthering on to the consequences of saying that, staff doesn't want to fix 2 potholes because they are only allowed to fix 1 pothole, and then they'll have to justify the time spent. These hours that we spend doing the certain things that we do, say this park takes 10 hours to lawn mow. There's the consequences if it's not done, what happened, and where's your accountability as to what happened. It just surprises me that we don't have that already in place. Is there other municipalities that do have this in place? And can you just maybe explain the ones that do, or if how this could look like? That's kind of what I'm asking through the chair.
So are you, through the chair, if I could take that one, it's really a balance between fixing that other pothole and knowing that you have an hour to fix a hot pothole. It's going to take 2 hours now to fix 2, and having that ability to then report that back or get permission or some sort of thing. And that comes in back to the technologies that you're utilizing to schedule, to bump, the thing that was going to be done at the end of the day to enable that extra work. So it is a balance between that, but also, not standing around and not doing a pothole for a few hours and then doing it, which I'm sure, is why you want to have some time standards and why you want to have that kind of performance metric there. But you still want to empower workers to be able to do things while they're there. Like if you're in a parks truck and you're driving along and you see a broken sign, that's a city sign, you want to be able to report that in and say, hey, can you fix this sign? Because you're out there, especially all the outside workers are out into the city and looking and seeing things. You want to give them the ability through technologies which exist to point out things that may not even be in their department. A parking violation that's blocking some traffic. If they see that, can they dial it in? And that CRM and the scheduling and et cetera will really support that kind of behavior in what they're doing. So it is a balance, but it's also accountability and empowerment all at the same time. I would bring it down to that.
If I might just add a couple of additional comments. So I think you talked about the maintenance shop. Well, you do have it in place in the transit maintenance shop here. It's 90% done, I would suggest, given where I'd expect it to be. So there's some good examples there. And I think the key here really is to be collecting the data and monitoring performance over a period of time. It's not that everybody has to do every job to standard every day. There are often reasons why you can't hit the standard. Maybe that wheel nut seized on that axle, or maybe you couldn't quite get to the oil filter because you hurt your thumb yesterday. I don't know, but you want to isolate those examples. But chronic underperformance over a long period of time needs to be addressed, and you can either put up with it and ignore it, or you can retrain and you can try and develop. And if not, you'll have to take some sanctions. That's the way of the world, unfortunately. And that's just kind of how I would sort of lay out the sort of performance piece, the measurement, the assessment over a longer period, and helping people to get better if they need to get better. The standards, as you know, for maintenance are well established. They're not draconian, they're not that difficult generally, so they should be reasonably achievable much of the time by most of the people. And those that can't just need some help.
And these standards, I believe, us as council, now that we know they don't exist, we owe that to our taxpayers, and we owe this to the people within our community that are working. Going back to parks, I have had a lot of complaints about city trucks here, city trucks there, and you see them and stuff. And I know from my experience, GPSs are mandatory in vehicles, in vehicles that I've had, where jobs I've had, not just because accountability as to where I am, but also so that they know where I am, so that if it's unsafe or I'm out on the highway.
Do you have a
and-
question there?
Yes, I do. So I'd like to know, you talked about the $1 million for the GPSs, and I can't remember exactly how that was stationed. But what do you, and you said that we have the GPSs in the fleet vehicles, is that correct through the chair? Or through some vehicles we have?
So my understanding is that you have a GPS in the transit fleet and you have telematics in about 70 other assets.
Okay.
The telematics is an extension of GPS. It allows you to monitor speed, harsh acceleration, deceleration, and a bunch of other kind of engine parameters in addition to the position of the vehicle or the asset, which is the GPS piece.
So do you feel the cost to put in a GPS into all of our city vehicles, which I believe that we should for safety for people, number one, would that cost outweigh the value added through the chair?
So no. So I wouldn't do it in every asset. I'd do it in the assets where there's a financial payback, and there's a financial payback in most of the asset classes that I saw, based on our understanding of what the savings typically are. And I think it's $40 for a wiring harness and $40 for the sensor pack. It's not expensive.
No.
And the ongoing monitoring is not expensive either, and I think that's already factored out of the savings.
Right.
I think the payback should be pretty immediate. Now, the point that I made earlier, if you do sharpen up the maintenance shop and the maintenance costs drop, then the savings through telematics drop. You can't save the same money twice. But I would say, there are very few clients that I know that aren't doing this.
I know.
And that public and private sector, because it pays back pretty quickly. And the service providers you have been doing it for on and off for about 10 years now, in one form or another, and they're well-oiled machines. Absolutely,
and it's funny that you say that. I had it in my daughter's vehicles because we lived out of town, so I needed to know, if they were safe or whatever. So thank you for that. So that's something. Oh, my goodness. Going back to KPIs implementation, can you give me a reason why this didn't exist and why this was never implemented? I mean, every job I've had, I have goals. This is what I need to do. This is what I need to achieve. And this is the reasons why I didn't achieve it. These are the reasons why I did, so on and so forth. It's just been a standard in jobs that I've had. So I'm trying to understand why we as the city don't have that implemented already in place through the chair.
I mean, I would say you do in some places.
Yeah,
I mean, you do have
some.
some KPIs in place for certain maintenance operations in facilities, in transit as well, and there are some other places where you do have some KPIs. I mean, they're not widely reported, but they are used as managerial controls and to drive performance and improvement in certain aspects and to essentially keep control of the labour. I just don't think it's ever been addressed as a citywide issue. I think it's been, and I'm speculating because I don't know and I haven't looked into the root causes, but I would say it's kind of where people think it's a good idea, they've gone ahead and done it to the best of their abilities where they can. So you have some islands of good practice, but it's not universal.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would just add on to what Tony was saying was, I mean, we saw lots of evidence of metrics, but not. So it's one thing to have a metric on something; it's another thing to have it as a KPI, right? Where it's performance that you can control that's tied to an outcome that you're looking for, right? So, I think that is a common gap that I think we see in some organizations, but not all, right? And so the most efficient organizations really have strong KPIs that are tied to the outcomes that they're trying to achieve.
And through the chair, if I could add some examples that I saw that were great. In service requests for the IT department, they track those, and they track how long it takes to resolve them, whether or not it was a emergency versus just a nice to have, and the time to take to close those tickets, etc. So there is data there that is being taken and utilized in that regard, and in many others. Quite often, as Matt said, we see different levels of maturity with KPIs, but quite often it also takes the ability to track the data that's maybe non-financial in nature, in the system to be able to report back on that. So when you go to design a good one, you need to also be capturing the appropriate data. So I've seen citizen service desks where they're writing it down in a spreadsheet, and they forget to write it down, they forget to say whether it's been closed, etc. So they're just not capturing the data, and they need the tools to do that to support those KPIs.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you, as counselors, feel the consequences when they are done, so thank you. Another question, point number 39 here, tighten financial controls over 620 fund. Can you explain this to me, the recommendations? If this is something that council, could we put this focus on our internal auditor? Would this be something you recommend through the chair? And explain to me what number 39 means.
Yeah, the 620 fund. So I think in the baseline year, I mean, I think the 620 fund in roadways was about 26 million, and it was about 7 or 8 million, I think, in facilities. I don't have the numbers for the other ones in front of me. What really happens is that sort of that expenditure is sort of transmitted from the spending service or the spending department to the supporting department. And so the problem that you have with a fund like that currently, when you don't have the KPIs, is there's no. And if I step back and just look at it purely logically, there's no real drive in the absence of tension on the transmitting department to drive productivity or to reduce its costs, because somebody else is picking up the tab, effectively. And then when it arrives in the receiving department, then they don't have a lot of details or background of understanding to be able to challenge the numbers. So you're kind of stuck with money kind of moving around the system, or funds moving around the system that are hard to challenge. And you could fix that, potentially, and I think there's some work going on that. Or you could look at the kind of root cause of this thing, which really is around measures, controls and services, and try and ratchet things down using the tension and by implementing the controls. And then it doesn't really matter where you send it, because you know it's efficient, to be honest. So that's kind of the 620 fund. It's not that it's bad, it's not that it's wrong, and my colleague here would comment on any of the accounting principles for that. It just is that it kind of exists in a world where there isn't much of a drive to do much about it, in my view.
Thank you. So is this something, I do believe, if I'm, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, have we now hired an internal auditor through the chair? Sorry.
So through you, Madam Chair, there will be a conversation today about audit, and we'll be able to speak in a little more detail in that regard.
So we can speak to this. Okay, thank you, Chris. Another question I have, I heard it on the doorstep, procurement soft local, we're not getting the business, Regina's going to Saskatoon because they gave them a $5 better deal on the office chairs than they did in Regina. With this procurement and the changing over and the issues that you're addressing in your procurement recommendations, is that something that we should be looking into? I looked at it as going, well, if we're going to say Vancouver to buy chairs and we're giving that business because that business is $10,000 or $5,000 less than buying here in Regina. But my thinking is, well, yes, but if we buy here in Regina, that $10,000 will be spent in Regina, utilizing Regina, and supporting our businesses in Regina. So even though it's a little bit more, the payoff is just so much better. Is that something that could be addressed or should be addressed when we're looking at the procurement? And then how could that be addressed? How could we justify that we just spent an extra $10,000 on hiring or getting from our supplies from Regina? Can you just speak to that a little bit as to the benefits, and is that been thought about in this procurement change through the chair?
Yeah.
Through the chair, if I can answer that one. There are laws and rules around the free trade agreement that have to be first and foremost looked at when you look at procurement. So there are certain constraints to that kind of thinking, but it is certainly, there's also, and the council has also asked the city to look at sustainability and different kinds of aspects of who your vendors are. When we look at the vendors and we rank them and rate them as part of this this, looking at how to procure and supply, that would be an aspect, but we have to be very careful about the constraints that you would be under as an organization with the trade agreements that you have and the values that we're talking about.
And just to add on to what Shelley was saying, I think certainly factoring in ESG into your procurement, I think is one of the leading practices that we're starting to see now. So looking at, I mean, to Shelley's point, the sustainability of your supply chain, right? And local will be a factor in terms of that. It doesn't mean that you're going to buy everything local and pay more, but I think you have to understand if you're getting better deals in Vancouver, why is that, right? And is it a booming business there? And then obviously, I mean, there's risks associated with those locations, right? How do you get the goods from there to here, and is that going to impact the performance of your contract too, right? And is the full cost of delivering that good to you really factored in, right? So when you get an organic banana in Canada in your supermarket in the middle of the winter, right, for 99 cents or whatever it is, right? Like, is the full cost of getting that banana to the supermarket here really been factored in, right? And I think that's why ESG probably has to start to play a role in terms of how governments in general start to procure services.
Right, and also adding to that too is if we're only buying from Regina, then we might get lost out in other places that are going to buy from Regina too. So, thank you guys very much for all this. It's really, it gives me such hope that we as councillors can do just better for the people of Regina. For myself included, I'm a taxpayer, so thank you for all of this work. I really, really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mayor Masterson.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I have a question. Does the opportunity exist in the 6 service areas you were looking at? Does the opportunity exist for employee contribution in terms of improvements to process or efficiency?
Yeah, through the chair, absolutely. As you go forward with implementation, one of the things I find is the people that are on the ground doing the work have some of the best ideas because they know they want to make this change. They know they want to, if I just could do it this way, if I could just do it that way, it would be way more efficient. So as we drive through these 14 opportunities and we get the transformation office working to get those going, the change management and communications aspects with the stakeholders that are involved would need to be part of the process.
Thank you. Part of my question is, did you find it currently exists?
That's a very good question through the chair. Yeah, I did find that it did exist in some of the departments that I was looking at. So definitely in IT, there's we talked to lots of staff in different areas to understand how they deliver services and where that is. I will defer to Tony to talk more about some of the outside workers. With procurement, it definitely employee input was part of the process when it comes to some of the great things that they have started and areas where they are trying to make inroads. So that was, more of the supervisor level, et cetera. But yes, in that case, that was done. Was there a survey of employees in each of the departments done? No, we did not do that in this project.
Yeah, my understanding is that in the transit fleet work that's been done, there was some close cooperation and interaction happening there. And I think the standards, were settled. I'm not entirely sure where you're at on that now. It's been a little while since I looked. So it does go on in certain places. And I think whether maybe Dorian might want to comment on some of the collaboration in the roadways, please, Dorian.
Sure. Thanks, Tony. I think we've, in some of the interviews with the roadways folks, we've seen good evidence and good examples of improving practices. So I think that happens. I think, it doesn't happen everywhere. I think, as Tony said, there's places in the organization that, because of opportunity or opportunity or events or circumstances, that it is easier to do that. But it does happen in places.
Thank you. Could I get you to speak to, and I know it's in part of the 53, the asphalt plant that we had? Hearing from the community, we know that this is a touch of a bone of contention at times, that the city owns an asphalt plant. Would you mind speaking to that?
Yeah, so I went there and had a look and pulled out some numbers to try and get an understanding of it. I mean, I think you don't run it on 3 shifts, but if you did, you'd have more asphalt than the province could probably deal with, I would have thought, because its capacity, I think, is like, anyway, it begins with a 5 and it's got lots of zeros after it. I can't remember the exact number, my apologies on that. But it's a big capacity asphalt plant. Minor opportunities to drive a little bit of labour productivity, maybe, but you're into that sort of like, 90th percentile piece there, and I wouldn't be pushing that home hard anytime soon. I think, looking at the unit costs for the baseline year, they were kind of, if you factor in some overhead allocation, a little bit below what I understand the market rate to be. So if you'd outsourced the asphalt from that plant, you might have spent another $1 million, I think was the number that we kind of concluded on at that point, which is kind of one side of the equation. So the other side of the equation would be that if you then take the asphalt plant and think, well, I'll supply to the private sector, it's a bit unfair to do that unless you add in like some rent and some rates and property taxes and so on. And when you add those in, you kind of end up at the same market rate that everybody else is kind of at. So you've got a large plant that sort of saves you a little bit of money if you keep it internally, but if you if you want to compete on the open market and not distort the market, you kind of don't have a particularly attractive offer. You're kind of just one of everybody else. And if you do decide to close it down, I guess you've got to shutter it and remediate the site potentially. I know it's only about 1/3 of the site where you keep all the gravel and so on. So you end up with a plant that isn't working, that's kind of going to be derelict. You have to tear down, there's some cost there, you might have to reclaim the land, all that sort of stuff. So I couldn't quite work out what to do with it, than what you're doing with it differently today. On one hand, going external for the asphalt, you pay a bit more money, but you're not overly competitive if you try and supply the private sector either.
Thank you. In terms of, you've highlighted, yes, we focused in on 14 as priorities, but you've highlighted 2 really big pieces, which is culture. Do you have any insight into why those cultures don't exist right now? Why we don't have a performance culture? Why we don't have a service culture? And I'm only speaking from your interviews with, and the investigation.
Yeah, so through the chair, in terms of insights with respect to the culture, so one, I think, in terms of having those cultures, I think culture is developed over time, and I think that the right systems, tools, and investments have not been made, I think, over a period of time in order to help enable some of that culture. In terms of the city staff, in terms of how they think and deliver their services, I think there are some really engaged staff for sure. But there are examples that we've seen and heard about where I think it's resembling of a fact that there isn't the right performance indicators on those staff and monitoring, and part of that could be due to the lack of capacity to effectively manage and support those staff. And effectively address those issues as they arise. Part of it is to the environment that you're in terms of it's a unionized employee base, and you have to respect the relationship with the union. And the union is a big partner, I think, in terms of how this delivers. This gets delivered moving forward, and I would characterize it as a partnership. And so I think they're part of the answer in terms of how to improve the culture moving forward.
Yeah, and I think it comes back again to there has to be a sort of concerted and focused effort to define the services and set the measures in place. They don't sort of materialise out of thin air. It has to be kind of a managerial decision. And if you've not really travelled that route, and you don't really have the tension in the system, you're not going to sort of naturally improve. So I think that management just needs to set those parameters out and just get going. There is a big focus, I think, from what I've seen in the conversations I've had, in getting the job done. Of course, whether the job that's being done is exactly the right job at the right speed is a different question. So I think it's really about organising to deliver what needs to be done and then measuring and executing on that in a kind of clear way.
So in terms of an organizational maturity level on the performance management and the service level standards, like where are we on that?
Yeah, so through the chair, I mean, we were really focused, this is not so much of an assessment in terms of, were you inefficient or efficient in the past? It's more about where to improve in the future. Based on the recommendations in our report, like, you have a lot of work ahead of you in terms of being able to get to the efficient organization. Like, the comments around service profiles and making sure that people understand, like, that's, I think, fundamental in terms of, some changes that need to be made in order to get to being, what we would say are really achieving some of those efficient opportunities to really help you improve.
So we have a lot of really smart people here, and I know that. But skill sets, tools, mindsets, it's like building a muscle, right, in terms of exercising that. What's the bridge that council needs to be aware of between it not existing in lots of places, knowing that we have islands of goods, not existing, and it needs to be done? What's the bridge mechanism?
So through the chair, certainly I would say, the starting point is the transformation office, right, in terms of and being directly accountable and reporting to council in terms of the changes that we're recommending. But I think moving forward in terms of how management reports to council, having constant conversations about KPIs, having constant conversations about the service focus, and digital focus as well. I think, those are going to be very important. It has to be ingrained in terms of how management comes to council with reports and information and to guide, council in terms of its decision-making process, right? And so I think, the transformation office will be, in terms of the work that it establishes, will help start to establish, those mechanisms that are in place in terms of, how management needs to report to council.
And if I could add to that through the chair, the transformation office takes it from the departmental level of you have to get this done to the organizational level of making it get done. So if you need HR, if you need IT, if you need you need to break down those silos to make it a project and a project team that works together for the transformation that we're looking for. If you leave it up to a department, it may still get done, but it's not supported from a whole organizational structure. So I think the bridge is definitely the transformation office and the way it's governed to help ensure that the right people are at the table with the right skill set to make things happen.
I might just add a couple of comments. The bridge is getting some help on setting the transformation office up quickly. Not huge, but just getting it specified correctly and up and running and working. You'll naturally have assistance on some of the technology because you're going to employ technology vendors to do that anyway. Service definitions, KPIs, that's critical as well to set up quite quickly and get moving because it's a real platform that you build everything else off. And again, you might want to do a little bit more of a detailed review in procurement as well, particularly around some automation in there. If you're going to pay discounts for early payments, for example, you need quite slick processes, and there's lots of automation that can be done there. I wouldn't have any. The telematics piece is a kind of natural, kind of easy with a vendor anyway. Maybe a short-term shot in the arm in the civic maintenance operations piece too. The manager's busy, and he needs to focus, and it's going to take concerted effort. Short-term shot in the arm on that one. And maybe some external help on the ratchet and the introduction of tension as to how far to go and how quickly might be helpful as well. But to echo my colleagues' comments, it really is getting that transformation office doing the right things first off.
Thank you. I actually want to bring it back because you used the word project, and I'd highlighted that earlier. What's the difference between, can you identify, and I think you maybe did, and I apologize, but the difference between what's happening now and the project principle?
Thank you. And through the chair, the idea is to take each of these 14 and break it into you saw our Gantt chart. That's a very high level overview of the timelines and activities. Each of these projects would need a project management plan put in place with those 30-day, 60-day, 90-day milestones and who's going to accomplish them and report back on the status of those activities. So it's really taking the opportunities, breaking them down into activities and putting together a project plan. So that does get done in many different ways in the city. I think there used to be a project management office that is no longer, but it's basically breaking it down into small pieces and having those accountabilities and having that transparent. So one of the things that I always say when I do a project, because we did one for this activity as well in our efficiency review, is things aren't necessarily going to go the way you want them to, and there's going to be risks. There's going to be red flags that come up. And so, the accountability may not just be everything's going beautifully, here's all the green. It's actually bringing people involved in understanding this isn't working. We need to pivot. We need to rethink these certain things as part of that plan as well. So it's basically just making sure that everybody's aware of what's going on and that's broken down and reported.
If I could maybe add a couple of comments as well. I mean, so you're talking about a program of change here. It's multi-year. And remember, this is just 6 of the services. It's not all the others as well. So there's lots of other stuff to have a go at potentially at some point too. So what's happening now is change really is happening in the line, in the managerial line. And I wouldn't say that it's ad hoc, but it's really down to the ELT member or the director or the managers to drive that change, and they are busy. So what you're doing by developing a transformation office is you're providing clarity on the plan. You declare a position and you need to execute because it's clear and it's stated and it's understood. And it really is, it's the focus, to my colleague's point, on that declared plan for execution that's going to be quite different. It's kind of, when things are buried in the line, it's hard to work out exactly where you are, particularly when you've got a sense of urgency, you need to make a difference quite quickly. So it really is about elevating, reporting, providing the skills and experience where that's required in certain aspects, arms and legs in other aspects as well. But it really is the visibility that's the big thing, and the continual focus. It's somebody's job to focus on getting that done.
Thank you for that, and I think you may have answered my last question, which is, so as a council who is oversight over budget and strategy and the implementation of policy, what should we take away from this? What's our role?
So through the chair, I mean, obviously, council, is the voice of the people, right? And I think, there's accountability up to council that needs to be clear here. And it's not just, the accountability with respect to this project or these 14 opportunities. It's about everything that comes in front of the council. And so, I mean, I think, having a focus and intention in terms of wanting to understand, being very clear in terms of how do we define the service, what are the key outcomes that we're looking for, what are the key performance indicators, how are things improving or not, and what investments need to be made, and factoring in what you know from your citizen constituents as well, and using that to set your policy direction, right, is going to be extremely important. So being able to take the voice of the citizen and overlay that in terms of taking out some of the principles that we've talked about, but really sort of expecting of management in the city going forward in terms of whatever KPIs, what is the change that's happening here and how are we executing on that change, and really being updated and driving that through in every council decision, I think is extremely important.
I think I would say 4 things really. Accept the report that we presented today. When the response comes back, drill into the response and make sure that you're comfortable with it. And then really accept that and then pay an interest on an ongoing basis so that you can clearly understand that what's been presented here and is in the response is being executed.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see anyone else requesting to speak, but I have a few questions. So on page 25 of the report, under procurement, I'm wondering if you can explain what is meant by referring to the 39 contracts, POs, purchase orders, right? I assume that means, was approximately 17% greater than the total contract values. And that if there was better monitoring and tracking of all contract values versus POs, it could result in savings of about $2 million. So I'm just wondering, I don't completely understand what is being said in that statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What we did when we were doing our baseline review is we asked for the biggest contracts that the city has signed and is in process or that are in play, and we did an analysis of them, and we noted that 39 of the 66 had the information that we were looking for. So they have both the total contract and the purchase value, order value tracked. And again, this isn't all in a financial system, so it's data coming from different places. But we were able to look at 39 of those. Within those 39, we then looked at, well, what was the final purchase order amount compared to the contract value? And 17% of them were greater than the contract. So you've contracted with a vendor, you've signed something off to say this is going to cost $1 million. The final purchase order was greater than that in 17% of the cases. What that means is something changed in the scope, probably, of the contract, so there was a change order that needed to occur to increase the value. But having control of that and the departments and the businesses that sign those contracts, to be honest, what happens quite often is the contract is put aside and the work happens and the change order is approved, et cetera, and it continues. But to have somebody do that analysis and look back to it and make sure that that there isn't scope creep, there isn't, somebody lowballing and then change ordering their way back to, the value that somebody else bid when they put in everything in. And just have a little bit more accountability around that. That's where we're coming from with that. And if you have technology that tracks that and it's in the system and it's visible to all the management that needs to look at that, then there's going to be more pushback on contractors to stay within those contract prices.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, if we put in tighter performance standards with some of our contracts, would this require additional city staff to basically monitor, be kind of project managers of the work?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The way it works right now is that if I'm a business within the city that needs to get a contract done, I'm going to work with procurement. I'm going to get the contract done with the vendor, et cetera. And it's up to me to manage that contract. So it's happening now. It definitely is. But this is, if you can get some further data and technology in place to have more of a central view of that, then you can ensure that, when you're putting service standards in, if you're not meeting the standard, is there a penalty within the contract to require the vendor to fix what they were supposed to do? If you were supposed to put some gravel down somewhere and, didn't put enough down, you can call them back and say, in the contract, you're supposed to do this, come back and do it, and at no charge to the city. So having that understanding of the contract, having those service levels in the contract, and having accountability by that business that's working with the vendor to hold them accountable to the contract is necessary.
Okay. Regarding the fleet, we're going to be receiving a report on energy and sustainability. And one thing that might be happening is our fleet might be changing. I don't know what's going to happen, but we might be going to an electric fleet. So were some of those things considered in some of your recommendations? Because electric trucks would need less maintenance, I understand. There's no motor, right? So
yeah, we didn't do the problem is you don't really have any apart from the 70 assets, you don't really have any data collected through telematics, and you need that usually to be able to make a determination on whether you should go electric or not in certain classes of vehicles. So our experience is that in certain classes, often a third of the fleet can go electric. Just depends on the asset class. And so I think that's a consideration to be had. Once those data are available, and your third-party provider can probably tell you that quite quickly, given the usage patterns and the fuel costs and the maintenance bills and those sorts of things. Typically over a longer-term life, over a long-term life, the electric vehicles don't work out to be crazy expensive. Some of them can be less expensive because the maintenance is often less. Obviously, the fuel's a bit less, and as long as the batteries don't break, all those sorts of things. So it can be done, but you need some data to do it typically.
All right. Regarding parks and the suggestions around outsourcing parks maintenance and pruning, you did make a suggestion on page 81 that forestry could reduce costs by having 2 people in 1 truck pulling a chipper rather than using 2 trucks. I guess my question is regarding our forests, our trees as an asset, and also around service level. If we look at that whole area and those recommendations around there, if we weigh that the service level and the importance of maintaining that asset weighs higher than any kind of additional kinds of cost efficiencies, would you think that would be an appropriate way to kind of look at that question?
Well, thank you, Chair. That is a factor that you do need to look into, and there has been a pilot done with the chipper being pulled and the 2 staff in the truck. And the idea there is that you would still be doing the amount of pruning, et cetera, that you need to do. So you do need to look at, are we doing enough with reduction of that staffing level? I think that I'd have to defer back to administration, but I think it's a longer day for the 2 that are doing the work, but they're accomplishing quite a lot with that. And it's just the physical need to have 4 people if you're going to drive 2 trucks versus the 2 if you're going to pull the chipper. They still get there, they can still use the equipment and get the pruning done. And I agree with you that a lot has been done by parks around trees in Regina, and maintaining trees and dealing with your very dry climate and making sure that the right trees are planted and that the irrigation is working correctly. And there is GPS around irrigation and going through the city and making sure trees are watered at the right times, et cetera. So we looked at outsourcing, and then we looked at how to be more efficient internally. So as to Tony's point earlier, sometimes it's just easier to make a few tweaks to how you're doing things now, and you can make the costs less expensive. And this was a great example of where we did get cost per service, so we could tell how much it cost to prune a tree and be able to do that kind of analysis. And that goes back to service levels and understanding what it costs to do a service, so you can make those kind of decisions. So this was a great example of somebody who dug into the data from the Parks Department and said, how much does it cost to prune a tree? Well, what's happening in the marketplace that I could get the trees for pruned, and then what can I do internally to make it more efficient? But my understanding is the service level would remain the same, so the trees would still be taken care of.
Okay, thank you. My last question is just, I didn't see, and I might have missed it, but I didn't see a lot of, I didn't see recommendations around training of managers and staff in terms of trying to change how we do things. So would that be something that the Transformation Office would be maybe not specifically doing itself, but ensuring that kind of training happens? Because I think that's really critical piece if we want to empower workers, which you have said, is that they need to, the managers, those that are directing the work, need to have really good training as well to support that work.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of, the transformation office, starting that process. I mean, you're right in terms of maybe not actually executing or delivering on the training, but there needs to be an assessment done in terms of capacity and capability, right? And so, if it's a capability issue, an assessment needs to be made in terms of, do we actually need to train up our staff or not, or how do we address the capability issue, right? And if it's a capacity issue, then obviously theoretically there shouldn't be training associated with that, because it's just more about finding time for that individual. So I think when you get into the nuts and bolts in terms of the transformation office and executing on the plan, I think in having conversations with the services themselves, the departments themselves, that will absolutely have to come through in the detailed implementation plan.
Okay, thank you. We are at our mandatory break. I want to thank you very much for presenting today. And so we will take a 15-minute mandatory break. And I'm not sure if you're going to be staying in the gallery or not, but we'll be dealing with the report as soon as we come back from break. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, welcome back. We will now consider EX 21-83, Deloitte LLP City of Regina Efficiency Rule Review. Can I ask Mr. Chris Holden, City Manager, to introduce the report? Oops, I lost it.
Thank you, and through the chair. So obviously you've had a presentation from Deloitte. You heard some introductory comments from myself in terms of, I think, the opportunity that the efficiency review provides. You'll notice that we have our 6 directors that were involved in the service review that engaged directly with Deloitte. This is a priority for us as an administration. I'll say that this is one of the most important reports that has come in front of Exec Committee and will Council in my time as City Manager. You've heard some opportunities around individual service areas, but I think more importantly, you've heard about the need for some change, I think fairly significant change, and some improvement to our service culture and our performance culture. The Mayor highlighted yesterday in our State of the City address, as an organization, we need to be better, and this is all about making sure that we are better. And it's phase 1, it's the first 6 service areas, and there are those foundational pieces that Deloitte has highlighted. So our plan is to obviously reflect over the next month and bring Exec Committee an implementation plan in January that will clearly outline and articulate our project plans in terms of how we will advance those 14 priorities, the timelines in terms of delivering the recommendations from Deloitte, and then how we're going to report back to Council and how we're going to report back to the community on our performance in meeting, obviously, the outcomes and the expectation of those 14 priorities. And I think the other piece is, and Deloitte highlighted that, is there's a real opportunity to cascade as we learn to different areas of the organization. So we start in parks with KPIs and scheduling, and then we move it into roadways, and then we move it into facilities. We move it across the organization. There was a question about training. If we don't have a culture of performance today, and we don't do a great job across the organization on KPIs, and we need KPIs to drive performance, driving performance and using KPIs, I think, also provides opportunities for accountability. So if people are not delivering, they're not meeting the performance expectations, clearly there's opportunities for coaching and mentoring. And, as Deloitte indicated, at some point, if you don't get there, then there's decisions that you need to make in terms of whether an employee remains a part of the organization or not. Then that's just a reality. So we will look at some training opportunities for our organization. We've talked about kicking off 2022 with a leadership development day where we bring in some expertise. We talk about KPIs so that we can drive a different level of conversation. Conversation about metrics. We have metrics. They're not really key performance indicators, and we're not doing the analysis on the data that we currently have. So this really is about opportunity to shift the organization, to shift the culture. And I think we have an obligation and a responsibility to make sure that we keep council more engaged and more informed in the discussions so you can have a better understanding and give us better direction and set better policy to make sure that the service levels that citizens expect, because you do have a different lens than we do as administration. You're closer to the residents, you're closer to the people, and our job is to make sure that we're supporting you in delivering on your direction and your policy decisions. So we look forward to answering any questions that you may have, but we will be back very early in January with a very detailed implementation plan of our response.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. Can I have somebody move the report? I think Councillor Bresciani had her mic on first, so why don't I let you go first and move the report?
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. So I'd like to know when administration has seen the report that came forward. I would like to know kind of the response. Many directors here have been here for many years. Maybe Chris could speak to it, but just, was this a surprise? Was this, I think over the past years we've been talking and asking about a lot of these to capture the data, to find out, where staff are, to have efficiencies. So again, the question would be is, why hasn't some of this been implemented? But do you think that when you saw this, what was the reaction, and can this be accomplished through you, Deputy Mayor?
So through you, Deputy Mayor, so obviously the administration has been engaged in the discussions with Deloitte over the last 5 months as we've moved through this process. Matt indicated that there's been some very collaborative conversation in terms of between Deloitte and ourselves. I think for me, it really emphasized that we need to get better. As an organization, there's a service culture, but I don't know that it's as strong as it needs to be at all times across the entire organization. We have pockets where we do have strong KPIs and performance is managed effectively, and then we have others where it's not. The advantage of using a consultant firm like Deloitte is they get to come in and look at your organization, and they get to engage in some conversations that, to be quite honest, administratively, we haven't taken that time. The other thing that drives us often is an annual budgeting process. So there are, for example, the customer relationship management project, it's in our 5-year capital, but it's further out. Clearly, Deloitte has said, you know what, you need to prioritize that. You need to make that happen. You need to do that within the next 3 years. So there is opportunities for us to take a look and have conversations with council about what the priorities are. So I think all of us as administration really welcome the opportunity to reflect on what Deloitte has raised. We all need to internalize for the organization. I take, comments about the lack of a service culture, the lack of a performance culture. At the end of the day, the city manager owns that. And so does my executive team, and so do all the directors and the managers, the leadership in the organization. We need to drive that service culture down right to the front line. We have a number of initiatives in place. We have the Accelerating Excellence Awards every year, where we actually award innovation within our workforce. And we've got some great successes. But it really does need to become the culture. People need to come to work. They need to live and breathe the fact that we need to provide service to citizens, It needs to be a quality service. It needs to be done within a responsive time frame. And what are we measuring? How are we reporting that? So I think there's an opportunity to just refocus our organization and really focus on improvement. And that can happen at all levels of our organization.
Thank you. Through you, Deputy Mayor, working with our unions on this and looking at, bringing in some of these changes are going to take conversations with the unions to say, do you think is that the reason things have not been implemented so far? When we look at telematics and we look at performance-based time management with accountability with GPS, all this, where are we with those conversations? And has that been something that previously has been discussed with our unions?
So through you, Deputy Mayor, the term partnership was used in terms of our unions, and that's how we look at the relationship with our unions and associations. It is a partnership. Obviously we have collective agreements in place. So, for example, when this report was released, I did have a union president that said, hey, do you know that there's some concern from our side that you can't implement recommendation X, Y, Z because they offend our collective agreement? The conversations we've been having is, as an organization, there's expectations politically, publicly, in terms of stakeholders and residents, that we be efficient and that we be cost effective. So we do have, and there was an example in forestry, where between, our human resources staff and our management in forestry, and actually our union president in Local 21 who works in forestry, committed to say, hey, let's take a look at how efficient we are, how cost effective we are. They came up with a new model of service delivery, which was highlighted as an example in the report. My approach to the unions is, let's work together. And, if we have to put some letters of understanding in place to be able to implement something on a temporary pilot basis, or if we need to go to the bargaining table and negotiate a new language, and of course all of our collective agreements expire at the end of December of this year, let's look for solutions. Because at the end of the day, I believe we have an obligation to make sure that we're cost effective. And we need to look to the unions to support us in that, being flexible. And we have early signs that they recognize that importance and they're willing to do that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're not successful through those negotiations, then it does mean that we need to consider contracting out and look at, the implications of that. And if we need to make changes in terms of, staffing and unionized positions, then we'll always look to how can we do this without impacting people directly? What are the retirements that are coming up, et cetera. So, but it is important. We need to work with the unions. We need them as our partners. We're in this together. Ultimately, whether you're a member of the administration or a member of the union, we're here to make sure that citizens are getting services and that they're getting cost-effective service delivery.
Thank you. Last question is regards to the Transformation Office and the reporting. We've heard from MNP that it is vitally important that would become a directive to council of the reporting. What does administration feel on that through the chair?
So through you, Deputy Mayor, so we're still having discussions on exactly the format of the office, where that expertise will come from. I think we have some staff within the organization today that can be assigned to that office. But the leadership, in terms of bringing in a different approach, a different way of thinking, it may require that we bring in an external resource to be the lead of it. It's really important that we have the Transformation Office in place to provide the support to the director teams and departments that need to implement this transformational work. But it's not a silver bullet. Having a transformation office does not change your culture. It's very important, but really it does get to the culture of the organization and the leadership that comes from the organization to make sure that we look at what change needs to occur and what's the timing of that, what kind of expertise do we need to support those individuals. The biggest thing is it needs to have the authority to be able to demand action. So, I'll just turn to Mr. Lacey because he's beside me. But if there's a transformation initiative that's going on in his division, he may look at, hey, you know what, it can't happen right now. That transformation office needs to be able to hold, Mr. Lacey to account to say, no, this is a priority. Council has, has expectations that we deliver on this, and we're going to move it forward. Now, we might have to make decisions to slow down something else, or not move forward with an initiative, and those, depending on what they are, might have to come back to council. Deloitte mentioned about administratively, it needs to be a part of the administration, but there needs to be a very strong reporting relationship back to council. So if you want to see the efficiency review implemented and you want to see a next phase move forward, then council needs to be able to see the work that's being done. Is it being done in a timely manner? Are we achieving the outcomes that were identified by Deloitte? And what's our progress? And you need to be given updates on an ongoing basis. So I would say it reports through council, through updates and reporting and discussions around the performance.
Time frame. Through you, Deputy Mayor, did you indicate earlier, when does administration see that this transformation office would be in place?
So through you, Deputy Mayor, we'll bring a report around our implementation plan for all 14 initiatives. What we've said is the transformation office will be in place within the first 3 months of 2022.
Okay. Just a comment and I'll be finished. I would like to see the transformation office in as soon as possible. I think that time is of the essence here. I also heard today about trust and, to improve communication, the pillar of trust. And I think that's really, really important. Trust is a big pillar within the organization. And, when we talk about our culture, if it's be performance or service, that's the key to this organization. We've talked about it a lot in the last many, many years. We've given lots of sessions. And the KPI, we have to get those down. And so I would be in full support of getting this done as soon as possible, getting it started. And I guess just the last piece that I think that is very, very critical here, that council is briefed. I would like to see that it would come through council actually from that office for ongoing reporting, so there's that open communication. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have, we're both hitting the button at the same time. Okay, Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. Just one comment by way of an undertaking, and I support this going ahead to council. Something the city manager had said regarding how we would propose engaging the respective labor organizations in implementing this. Involvement was hinted at with the consultant's report. So in the report that comes back to council that operationalizes it, I would like to see a labor and employee relations analysis regarding the actual collective agreement sections that could be affected. I think it's important for us to have that information. Anything in the collective agreements that would refer to training, reskilling, and so on. If that has to come in confidence because of the nature of the information, that's fine, but I think council has to be briefed on that. Included in there perhaps could also be an assessment of potential grievances, arbitration, and associated costs. So I think it's not enough for us to just tell administration, go do this and cooperate. I think we need to know the full ramifications. And also in that plan, the actual steps that will be taken to work with at a high level the various locals that represent a majority of our workers. So thank you very much, and I do appreciate the work. I think it resolves and addresses many concerns that we've been talking about.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too appreciate the work, and I appreciate the fulsome answers that the city manager has given in his introduction to this debate. I think that everything we have heard today can be summarized in 3 words. And those 3 words are, first of all, information, secondly, communication, and thirdly, innovation. And I just want to take a moment to unpack that. Information, this is where the report is particularly strong. Data, the use of data, telematics, KPIs, all performance indicators, all of that to measure how we're doing, it seems to me to be basic, and I think people will welcome it. Communication. It is critical that we deal with the issue of talking to each other. I want to mention 3 levels. Departments have to talk to each other internally. They have to talk to each other between departments. In other words, we've got to get rid of the silos. We've talked about that a lot. And maybe for us as counselors, we have to do a better job of talking to the administration, the senior level of the administration, about what our expectations are. And they have to do a better job keeping us informed about what they're doing. So that's a challenge for all of us. If we're going to move forward, we have to know what each other want, and we have to know what each other are doing. And I think that's a communication problem, and as Matt gave, that touches that trust. And the third thing, and I guess only someone with white hair can say this, we have to be much more nimble, much more flexible as an organization. We have to be able to turn process to the service of achieving our goals rather than having the goals serving the process. And we have to make sure we hear younger voices within our organization. Some of us are going to be here for a few more years if we're lucky, but the younger voices are going to be here for the next 20 or 30 years. They have modern training, they're full of vim and vigor, they have ideas. Let's capitalize on that. So I think that the innovation that we need can be largely driven by excited younger employees in the organization and willing senior employees to listen carefully. So what this is all about is modernization of our organization. And again, modernization means 3 things. It means information, it means communication, and it means innovation. I think it's been a useful morning.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Shaw.
I asked this question earlier, Chris, and I'd just like you to further talk about it. The internal auditor, what that's going to look like. Do we have somebody hired? Who's that internal auditor going to report to? And I'm going to go with Councillor Bresciani. Just from my experience with the whistleblower, with things like that, reporting to not us as councillor or reporting, can you explain to me how you know that that's going to be reported? Can you explain to me why it's going to be reported that way through the chair?
So through you, Deputy Mayor. So to go back to when the city had a full audit department, we'd be going back to the 1990s. And then our audit function was eliminated in the organization. And in the time that Mr. Lacey has been here, him and I have had conversations, as well as with Ms. Schultz, to say, we have a gap. And we need to have an audit function. We need to make sure that we have adequate financial controls in place. So we did hire an internal audit position. That position was probably hired, I want to say, 6 to 8 months ago. And one of the primary tasks of that individual is to start to look at some audit projects, but to also build a audit plan in terms of coming in front of council and saying, if we're going to have an effective audit function for this organization, which we absolutely require, this is what it needs to be structured like. We can't have one individual take on an audit function for an organization of our size. So that work is currently ongoing. And I know that Mr. Lacey is going to bring some recommendations as to a reporting requirement into council, so that council gets direct access to that audit function. And, if it's reporting to council, then there is not an administrative position that has an ability to interfere with that process. So we're just in the process of putting that in place, and there'll be a report coming shortly in terms of how we're proposing to move forward with audit for this organization.
Which leads me to this, and I know Mr. Lacey can account to this. I've been emailing him to say where we at with the internal auditor.
So, Councillor Shaw, just because we are dealing with the report EX 21-83 about the efficiency review, so I think that administration has answered that they're going to be bringing back a report. So I don't know if this is still related to the report that's before us, or.
Well, I'm working into the next question that this is going to lead up to. So communications, we knew nothing about this, and this person was hired 6 to 8 months ago, or I knew nothing about it. So which leads me to say, Chris, do you have any recommendations on continuing with this third-party efficiency operation going forward? Is that something that we should be looking into, not just this one-time thing, but more, or would that be handled with our internal auditor through the chair?
So, if I can, Deputy Mayor, I think there's two components to that question. Mm-hmm. One is, this is phase one of the efficiency review. We looked at 6 service areas. So we've got some work to do to put some of those foundational pieces in, which I then think lend themselves to opportunities to take a look at, potentially the next 6 service areas. Okay. What we need to do as a council, as administration, is have a conversation about, what did we learn through this process as administration? Absolutely. And are we comfortable, is council comfortable that those next 6 should follow a similar process to what Deloitte did, and it can be done internally with assigned resources? Or is it more important that we get the independent lens of a third party to take a look at the next 6? So I think that's work that we will do as we move forward. Obviously, the audit function has some different duties and responsibilities than working on efficiency. The transformation office, absolutely, I think, is going to be an opportunity to keep council informed, make some recommendations about what the next phase of the efficiency review looks like. And not to say that they can't come together at some point, that between the efficiency piece and an internal audit function, that there's not some conversations and some collaboration to make sure that we're getting the results that council expects.
So just to clarify and maybe go on, you guys, you talked about offending the union and their bargaining agreements and stuff. I don't understand what that meant, and is that, I don't know if you can give me kind of a layman's terms, is it kind of where you guys are going with that through the chair?
So through you, Deputy Mayor. So we have collective agreements in place, right, and obviously they have language around hours of work, scheduling, right, seniority groupings. Right. So if we look to introduce an efficiency that is not in alignment with our contractual obligations in a collective bargaining agreement, then we need to negotiate that. And that's where we will look to, work alongside the unions to say, hey, how do we get through this opportunity? And how do we make ourselves more efficient? And we need to work alongside them. We're looking for some collaboration from them, and they'll be looking for some collaboration from us. So we have rules around unionized work environments, and we just have to respect those and have the necessary discussions. And as Councillor Stevens has asked for, when we bring our report to say this is what implementation looks like, we'll outline at a high level some of those considerations that we need to discuss, negotiate as we move through the opportunities that are in front of you today.
Okay, because kind of what I was hearing was, I don't know, say it's 7 hours a day that they're supposed to work 7 hours a day, whether it's being accountable for those full 7 hours or not. So I don't understand. I wasn't understanding why this would cause a concern or a problem through the chair.
So through you, Deputy Mayor, in terms of, in the languages, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that gets to some of the schedule, right? So scheduling systems, putting some standards in place, that just puts rigor in terms of employees and what they're expected to go and deliver each and every day. So in that case, that is really about monitoring performance and making sure that employees understand what is expected of them each day. The other pieces are much bigger in terms of,
Right.
if we need to move to a 10-hour shift process, or we need to move to 7 days a week versus Monday to Friday. And there's language that,
Around.
restricts or
Okay.
governs what we can and can't do.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you for that clarification. I just want to add with this, I really believe this report, this efficiency review, comes down to one thing: accountability. I really, really believe I have held my children accountable. My residents hold me accountable. We are held accountable on a daily basis for the actions that we take and the consequences that come of those actions. So this, to me, I believe communication and accountability have got to be at the forefront of this moving forward. So thank you.
All right, Councillor Mancinelli, please.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I noted a lot of the recommendations have been appearing in the long-term planning from administration year to year, such as the GPS or some of the other data tools that they've described. Do you have any comment on why they've never actually been implemented or moved forward, how that's stalled out?
So through you, Deputy Mayor, I said in the introductory comments that I think we have a real opportunity here. And as we move into some conversations with council about strategic priorities and where you want to emphasize what you want to accomplish in the next 3 years, and we look at the efficiency review, and we look at how that then informs budget, that will drive some decisions. So, specific to whether it's the GPS technology or the telematics, those have been within budget submissions year after year. And actually, when it comes down to decision, we make some of those recommendations administratively to say, although that would be beneficial, we cannot do it today. And I think there's probably a need for the administration, as we look at some of these efficiencies, to bring some of those conversations to council sooner. If this is important, then we need to, move things forward in our budgeting process. So some of it has been tied to administrative decisions that ultimately council approves, to postpone or push some of those off because there's only so much funding available. Maybe on our part, an oversight to make sure that council was fully aware of the implications of maybe pushing off some of those decisions. So I think we can get better at that when we bring budgets forward and propose, mill rate increases and what is contained within the detail, so that you have a fuller understanding of exactly what decisions are being made and the impacts of pushing something further out.
I appreciate that. My comment was going to be, I'd appreciate you guys being much more aggressive in the business case without understanding the political repercussions we might face. I think it's a time to address these problems aggressively. I agree with Councillor Hawkins' comments, very much so, to the point where I think that this transformational office should be the Office of Innovation and Transformation, because I think it's really important for our municipality to innovate like never before through this time. That's the only comments I have. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I have Councillor LeBlanc.
Great, thank you. I'm going to support this going with the recommendation and getting a report back in January. That sounds great. One comment in terms of undertaking, I suppose, picking up on Councillor Stevens' point is, I think there's some tension in terms of the relationship with our unions that's being proposed here. So on the one side, we trust you workers to know about efficiencies. We might find if I'm fixing a pothole here, I can fix one here, and we want you to have some decision-making authority. So in one sense, we're trying to empower them, and the other, we're fundamentally mistrustful of them in that we want to know where their truck is at all times. Are you stopping at Tim Hortons on the way? Are you doing this in an hour? We don't trust you. to do the work we're paying you to do. So there's some tension there, and I'd just like to see that explored in general terms in the report that comes back, because I expect that might be a major discussion point for us. The second comment is just about the debate, I suppose, today. So I agree we ought to set up a transformation office if that's what administration recommends. There's something strange about the eagerness demonstrated in the debate today to set up this office for up to $2.1 million, whereas last week we were really bird-dogging about setting up an $800,000 office for the community wellness plan. So I think the incongruity demonstrates something about council priorities, and we'll of course revisit that next week, but I'll look forward to the report. Hope we support administration in its various recommendations, including this one. So thank you.
Councillor Findura, please.
Thank you to you, Madam Chair. I'm supportive of the recommendation. It's great work from Deloitte to, and this is what we were asking for someone to go out there and have a look to see what we're doing. There's going to be a buy-in. It's going to take a while. If you look at the implementation roadmap, you can't turn this thing on a dime. It's going to take, we're talking about culture, trust, respect of what we do. Working together, as City Manager mentioned, that's going to be very important. We don't need to worry about this. This is something that's been coming for a long time. Some would say we can run a city as a private business. Well, in certain point, but there are more difficult pieces into thinking that way as a municipalities. If you look at the implementation, I can see that the utilities and monitoring that is going to, you know, it's taking at least to 2024. I know there are some immediate things that will be happening. So I'm looking forward to the report coming back, just to see now the work's going. We know here we asked for this. Now what are we going to do with it? And that's the biggest challenge going to be, is that just be careful what you ask for, right? Not the way I'm saying it or meaning it, but it's important to put our heads together on all levels, from a council as a board of governors, and from administration and employees, citizenship. All of that will be very important to make things right. There'll be areas we're going to trip on, areas that we'll not be able to accomplish maybe, but I'm confident with the Deloitte's report and the ask of the external audit to come in to have a look at how we do things. And I think we have strong employees, management to deliver this. So again, I'm looking forward to 2022. Roll up our sleeves and see what's going to happen. So I am confident that this is a beginning. This is a start. I'm just going to make one comment, is that, again, we cannot turn this thing on a dime. We will crash. And so we have to be careful about that. Let's work smart. You can go breakneck speed to get somewhere. You're definitely going to, the vehicle's going to fall apart. So I just want to give caution to work smart and make sure that we're not missing any corners that's going to hit us and hurt us later. So again, I'm in support of this. This is a great work on both sides, administration and Deloitte and everyone else. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Findura. I do not see any other speakers, people requesting to speak. Just a couple questions from me, if I could. Just to administration, what was, you've given us reports in the past about the total dollar figure in efficiency savings that you've achieved over the last, I think it was 4 years. Could you repeat what that is?
So through you, Deputy Mayor, prior to this proposed budget that's in front of you, we had achieved in excess of $20 million in cost reductions and savings over the last 4 years.
With the transformation office, I am a little bit concerned about the price tag for it. Is it possible to, I mean, there's obviously been a demonstration that administration has been able to find efficiencies. This report highlights how we can find more just by doing things better. Will your report be coming back with recommendations on the staffing levels? I would really like to see it on the lower end, not on the higher end.
So through you, Deputy Mayor, just I think a general comment is, we have found efficiencies through looking at, service provision and how we've done that. It's getting more difficult to do, and I think it really does take a shift in our approach. Really a transformational opportunity in terms of looking at our businesses and how we can do them differently. So, to Councillor Beshiani's comment about let's get this in place fairly soon, Ms. Folk and her team have started to look at, some of the foundational pieces that we need to put that office together. And of course, we'll be bringing that as a part of the report. But I might just ask Ms. Folk to just talk about, the transformation office. I know she's had some conversations with Deloitte specific to that, as well as we've assigned a resource to start doing some of that research so that we can get it in place as quickly as possible.
Through you, Madam Chair, of course, as Deloitte talked about, that investment is an investment over 3 years. So the intent would be to have a center of excellence established that would focus on driving a focus on service delivery and performance, as well as implementing across the organization with the support of the entire organization significant components of those 14 priorities. So I just want to caution that with the investment. It is a one-time spend over 3 years, and it's really critical. And as Mr. Holden spoke about, the importance of increased communication, innovation, instilling a sense of service across the organization, and ensuring we've got the proper KPIs in place to manage and monitor our operations will be critical. And I believe we owe it to all of us, to the residents and the community, to be able to be transparent with that and to report out on that.
Okay, thank you for that. And just my last comment, and I don't know if this is an undertaking, but I hope that when the report comes to council, I am concerned about some of the recommendations about outsourcing pruning in our parks. And that is because we just received a report on the state of our forest, our urban forest, and we are designated a tree city of the world. We're all really proud of our forest, the canopy in our city. And we've had a net loss of 356 trees last year, mostly because of drought. As of September, we heard that our staff have already removed 519 trees. And most of the complaints I've heard from residents is regarding contractors pruning trees. Some of them might have been hired by SaskPower who are doing the work, or it could have been others that the city has hired. But I've heard a lot of concerns that our trees are not being pruned properly. So I do think that in terms of if service level is really important and maintaining our asset, which our forest is, our trees are an asset, that we have to really look at that situation really carefully, because if we're getting lots of complaints about what's happening to our trees, we have to deal with it, staff have to deal with it. And I just think we need to recognize that they're a really important asset to our city. So that's all I have to say. Councillor Mayor Masters wanted to speak, okay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You actually raised a good point that I think probably is worth exploring. Mr. Holding, could you explain the difference between finding efficiencies and cutting costs? Because I think that we talk about to Madam Chair's question was about finding efficiencies in the past. Did we find efficiencies or did we cut costs?
So through you, Deputy Mayor, I would say it's a combination of both. I mean, clearly there are examples when we talk about our $20 million where we have found an efficiency, we've changed a process, we've changed the way in which we deliver a service. And others, we have just looked at, you know, if we had to reduce our budget by 5% through a budget process, what would that look like? So it is a combination, absolutely.
Thanks. Could you give me an example of a service that we redesigned the process for to find an efficiency? Like, this happened over the last 4 years. I realize this happened back in 2017.
Yeah, I mean, through you, Deputy Mayor, so we've driven those through our budget process, right? So there are examples where we look at how we deliver services through Service Regina, right? The most recent example this year in terms of even how we do locate calls. And so we look at, is there an opportunity to reduce our costs by changing our service delivery model, which really creates an efficiency, versus simply take a look at the way that we cost something out, and we can find reductions in that way. You know, I just to make a comment in terms of the concerns around pruning, what the efficiency review does is it identifies the opportunities that we then need to explore. So Deloitte will say, you could contract out pruning. Yes, we could contract out pruning, but we should look internally first at what is the cost of delivering that service, so cost per tree in terms of pruning, and is there, you know, sometimes it's a process that we change, other times an efficiency and a cost, sometimes they're very closely related in terms of if we change the service delivery approach to tree pruning, moving from 2 trucks and a chipper to 1 truck and a chipper, and you can still achieve, you know, the same level of productivity or increased level of productivity. At the end of the day, it's a cost savings, but it's also efficiency in terms of how you deliver that program.
Thank you for that. And the reason I brought it up, because I think it's really important that the efficiency review created by Deloitte did call for investment in tools and resources for employees and for management in terms of executing. And so I wouldn't want this to be an exercise simply in cost cutting, which is different in my mind than efficiency. This has to be about how we work together to make sure we're giving the tools necessary that folks can do their jobs, and that we can measure that job, and then that feedback loop is created. That was my only point. Thank you, Madam Chair, for taking that point.
Thank you. So now we can call the vote on EX 21-83. I guess I should ask if Councillor Bresciani wanted to close up. No? Okay, good.
Deputy Mayor, the motion passes 9-0, and for the record, everyone is voting in favor of it, with the exception of Councillor Moll, who is absent from today's meeting, and Councillor Zahidniak, who left the meeting at the break.
Thank you. We have a delegation on the next item. Just want to make sure she's on the line. She is? Okay. So I would like to call upon Delegation Melissa Coomber-Benson. Please introduce yourself for the record, the organization you are representing, if any, and where you are from. You'll have 5 minutes to address the committee, after which you will have the opportunity to respond to any questions that the members of the committee may have.
Thank you very much. My name is Melissa Kummer-Benson, and I'm the CEO of YWCA Regina. Through you, Chair, I want to thank you for allowing me some time to speak with you today about our request, and thank City Administration for helping us put this forward. YWCA Regina is the longest and largest women-serving organization in our community, and we've been meeting the changing needs of our community for over 100 years. The Centre for Women and Families, which is what our request is about, will ensure we're able to continue to meet the needs of our community and address factors that are preventing vulnerable women and families from reaching their full potential and preventing us from living in an equitable community. The Centre for Women and Families addresses the new Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan that's in front of City Council. By keeping families together and addressing the high rates of intimate partner violence in our province and poverty rates among women and families in our community. Through our partners, Mobile Crisis, Regina Sexual Assault, and All Nations Hope Network, the hub model will ensure that vulnerable women and children will have access to wraparound services that will divert them from the need to access crisis services. In addition, the community multipurpose space will provide space for pop-up services and flexible space for programming that will continue to serve the changing needs in our community. We also recognize the importance of developing opportunities for economic growth and green projects in the City of Regina. The design of the building is net zero ready, and through its concrete construction has a thermal mass and capacity for solar generated energy in the future. The construction of the centre will require over 250,000 person-hours of skilled tradespeople and will create an average of 70 construction jobs over the course of a 20-month period. It will contribute to over $2.5 million of revenue to local construction supply companies, such as lumber yards and concrete plants. And in addition, once it's completed, the centre will be home to 3 local social enterprise business ventures that will support opportunities for job training and skill development. In order to put this request forward, we phased the project into separate sections: the community hub, the healing space, the housing, and the childcare. And we did this specifically so that we could meet stacking requirements that the federal government has put forward through the ISEP program. So this specific request to the city is about the healing hub and ceremony space. YWCA Regina serves over 80% urban Indigenous women and their families. We partner with Indigenous organizations to bring cultural knowledge, ceremony, ways of knowing, and practice to our organization. And the centre includes the healing and ceremony site, which will be the first ceremony and year-round sweat lodge available in our community. And if we get it built before Edmonton, it will be the first in the country. The development of this space has been recognized as leading the way and is much needed act of reconciliation in our city. It will be stewarded by All Nations Hope Network and a matriarch of women elders in our community. The Centre for Women and Families has a capital cost of $54 million, which is a $9 million increase from our original $45 million cost. This addition is a 20% contingency that's been added to the construction materials consultant and contractor costs at the recommendation of our project management team, given the recent increases to the cost of construction and materials. The Centre for Women and Families addresses the critical issues such as poverty and inequality, as well as services for those struggling with mental illness, substance use challenges, and homelessness, as defined in the City of Regina Community Wellbeing and Safety Plan. The wraparound and hub model is an immediate intervention to prevent and reduce crime in our city. In addition, the Centre for Women and Families serves as an opportunity of pride in our city. There are many opportunities for citizens of Regina to engage and give back to their community through the centre. The centre is accessible and open to all members of the community, and as such will foster a strong sense of community and belonging. And that is my presentation this afternoon, and I would love to answer any questions that folks have.
Okay, thank you very much. I have 1, 2, 3, 4. Councillor Shaw.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you very much for presenting You know where I stand on this. So we've had lots of conversations about this. I thank you guys for all the work that you do. We often hear of what you need. We don't have enough houses, or we don't have enough beds. Can you speak to me or give me some stats on the success rate that you've had in giving people, let's start with people that have come through your organization. What is the stats or the success rate that you have that you can share with us as to getting them into permanent housing, say, for example, through the chair?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Shaw. Through the chair, when we look at our outreach team, statistics are a difficult piece for us, but when we look at our outreach team and excuse me, and we can support women in their stable housing and they're connected to our outreach team, we have about 80% of the women can be stably housed up to 6 months, and it drops to about 70% stably housed up to a year, which is an incredible statistic when I look nationally at how difficult it is to maintain stable housing for women who have who are chronically homeless, who have experienced violence, and who are suffering through addictions. So we know that if we can have women involved in our programs, in our outreach teams specifically, and they have the support, the likelihood that they'll stay stably housed is much higher.
So that kind of goes to further question. You said 80% stable housing for 6 months and it drops down to 70% after a year. Is there any indicators as to why that 6 to 1 year drops that much, the 10% through the chair?
We don't have specific indicators why that happens, but I will say that the complexities of trauma and generational healing that needs to happen is a huge factor in why women struggle to stay permanently housed. I also think that support systems, particularly financial support systems available to vulnerable people in our community, are not adequate, and oftentimes folks have to make very difficult decisions about where to spend the money that they receive. And sometimes that means that they are in arrears, or sometimes that means that they fall behind in their utility bills. And so I think it's a complicated process to try and pinpoint directly what and why, I guess, women will not be able to stay stably housed for longer periods of time. But I think it's a healing process that adds to the complexity.
I don't want to get into the cost of people and what they have, and I mean I know people that are on assistance that fare well. My question, and you and I have talked about this, job creation, these women getting jobs. I always go back to the one thing that pulls a person out of poverty is a job, having the skills to go get a job. I see that, and we've talked about it before. I mean, you guys can only do so much, and I get that most of you guys do a lot. You talked a bit about, I think what we had talked about having some type of a jobs and training within the facility, having their own restaurant, having their own selling products and so on and so forth. Can you speak a little bit more towards that? What have you guys kind of come up with, and how much of a commitment is the YWCA in making in providing these type of services for the women through the chair?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have our two social enterprises, our Encore Market and our cafe and food services to our childcare, which we hope to provide both work experience and full employment, almost 100% besides the chef, to the women that we serve. And I think this is a we do this currently right now in small ways that we can in our current facility, in making sure that when women are ready and are interested in and have the capacity to enter into the workforce and their healing journey, that they have opportunities to do so with us, because this is a safe place for them to be. They already feel a sense of belonging, and so they have a capacity to thrive. And then we partner with other organizations to extend those, other companies and businesses in our community, to extend those work experiences, but still maintaining that support level for our women. So I think we are 100% committed to making sure that we provide employment opportunities for the people that we serve, and to continue to provide work experience opportunities as well for community partners like the Open Door Society and Fast Abilities, which are two organizations we work very closely with right now.
So thank you for that, Melissa. I know that's pretty big. The next question kind of goes along the lines of this new bill that you're talking about. Will it have the capacity to have other CBOs within your organizations? And not that you guys have to take care of it, but having so, say there's a senator that comes in there and says, Melissa, we can offer skill building in education in this department, this department, this department. Is there a capacity to have these organizations within this build through the chair?
Yes, through the chair, we have created multi-purpose space for that very reason, so that we have an opportunity to meet the current needs that we see right now and future needs of what the community is looking for. And our intent is to create space so that we can have pop-up programs, or potentially in the future permanent programs that are in that multi-purpose space. When we did research around what happened to hub-like buildings when they created purpose-built space in other communities, we recognized that the one thing they wish they had done was to create some flexibility in that. And so that multi-purpose space really is for that purpose.
Thank you, Melissa, for that. I don't have any more further questions, but I would just like to thank you for everything that you guys do. Melissa.
All right, thank you. I don't see any other questions, so I am going to ask Melissa, if you could please leave the meeting. Thank you so much for speaking today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we'll now consider EX 21-84 YWCA request for ICIP funding. Can I ask Mr. Barry Lacey from administration to introduce the report, please? And mic's off. Good.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So the City of Regina has had a long-standing relationship with the YWCA. And maybe just a little bit of a history to that. Back in 1968, when YWCA was constructing their current building, which is just across the street from City Hall, at that time, City Council leased that land to the YWCA for $1 per year. And then subsequently, that land was transferred to the YWCA in order to allow them to leverage that building and land with respect to financing. More recently, in 2019, when YWCA was looking at building this new facility, they approached City Council and requested land on Retallick Street, which City Council gifted to them, and that land had a value of $2 million. The item before you today relates to a request from the YWCA requesting up to $4 million from the city's allocation of ICIP funding, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program funding, to fund the Healing Space and Ceremonial Lodge portion of that larger Centre for Women and Families capital project. And I'll just remind Council, the ICIP funding, the city was allocated a portion of that funding. The overall amount remaining available in that allocated amount to the city was just a little over $131 million. And that amount is shared between the three levels of government. So 40% in this particular case of this $4 million request If it was approved, 40% would be funded by the feds, 33.3% is funded by the province, and then there's a requirement for there to be a local or a municipal share of 26.7%. So the request before council by the YWCA is to use up to $4 million from the city's allocation, and that local or municipal portion, which is just a little over $1 million, be funded by the city. Administration's recommendation in the report before you is to approve the use of up to $4 million of that ICIP funding available to the city, but that be conditional on the YWCA funding that local portion, and then secondly, obviously, the province and the feds agreeing to fund their application. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I have, I guess I need someone to move the report. Councillor Stevens, and you're on first to speak.
Thank you. Support the project again going forward. Mr. Lacey, just have a follow-up about ICIP funding, because we're borrowing from a pool of money. Do we still have some flexibility and ability to invest in other projects as well? For instance, if we wanted to invest in the replacement of lead service connection through ICIP, that would be eligible, correct?
Through you, Madam Chair. So as I mentioned, we have just a little over 131 in total of uncommitted ICIP funding that's been committed to the city. We have been before council previously with respect to priority projects that council had previously approved to advance with respect to seeking funding under ICIP. The total amount of that list is more than what we have left uncommitted. There are 3 pools that you can access ICIP funding under, a green pool, a community pool, as well as a transit pool. And so, with respect to the question about lead pipes in particular, that would need to be evaluated kind of under the ICIP guidelines. Just at first blush, I'm not necessarily sure if it would meet one of those 3 funding criteria. But, for example, the potable water plant at Buffalo Pound, for example, did fit under the green one, because as we renew that plant, there's a lot of energy efficiency type of opportunities and better water use management that go into that. So that did qualify under that green funding stream.
Thank you. This is a great organization. I look forward to seeing it in the community.
Thank you. I have Councillor Shaw.
I just didn't hear correctly, but I think I did, but this $4 million, this guarantees the funding from the feds and the province, or is this, where does that sound? Sorry, can you just clarify that for me? Thank you, through the chair.
So through you, Madam Chair, so this is a program that was initiated by the federal government. And so there is an application process, and so it would be the YWCA that would need to make an application under this program. And how that application works then is it, first of all, is approved by the province, and the province makes a recommendation to the feds, and then the feds ultimately approve the overall project. With the provincial and federal approval, then obviously their share of the funding comes with it. This is a little bit unique because most ICIP funding applications are made by the city for city projects. So this would be for an NGO. And so what the YWCA is looking for, and to be frank, what the province is looking for as well, is agreement by the city that that funding of this project for up to $4 million would come out of the city's pool of funds.
Okay, so if we say yes to it, and that's more of a guarantee that the feds and the province.
So if we say yes, sorry, through you, Madam Chair. So if we say yes to this, it kind of gives the province and the feds the green light that we're okay with it if they're okay with it.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Councillor Bresciani, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So just a comment. This is something that, as we've heard from Mr. Lacey, has gone back since I think 2018. Melissa has worked diligently in our community, met with many levels of government to try and bring this to fruition. I absolutely support this for the reason that we have the highest domestic violence rate in all of Canada. And there's a need in our community. I think that they've raised their dollars. Now, I do have a question for administration in regards to, did I understand that the money that they have raised is a commitment to the 4 million? Can I just get clarity?
So through you, Madam Chair, so the conversations we've had with them, the actual request from the YWCA is that the city fund the municipal portion. So we give them a grant of 1.07 million that would fund that local portion. So that is part of their request, that the feds would fund 40%, the province would fund 33%, and then that local portion, we would provide them a grant in order for that local portion to be funded. In our conversations with the YWCA, we did have a conversation with them about if administration recommended that that local portion be financed by the YWCA, what implications would that have for you? And our understanding is in the conversations with the YWCA, is they thought they could manage it as long as the funding requests they have for the other parts of that construction project from the federal government, whether that funding comes through. And the report on page, if I could just give me a second here. The report on page 5 kind of speaks to some of the other federal government grant funding that they're going after with respect to other components of that capital build. So there is a risk if they don't get that funding from the federal government for those other portions, then they would not have the flexibility to fund that local portion.
To the chair, then what would happen in that case?
So through you, Madam Chair, so I'm just speculating here. So first off, I think they have a pretty big problem if they can't get third-party funding for the other portions of the project. I think there's probably a bigger issue that they need to deal with than just this component. And secondly, should that happen, again, I would speculate there's always an opportunity then there to be further conversations about what support, additional support, if any, would the municipality be willing to give.
Okay, so just the process, if it doesn't, the other funding doesn't come through, it would be back to here to have a discussion.
Through you, Madam Chair, so I think that if the other funding, we didn't get into this level of conversation with them. So once again, I am suggesting here that if the other level of funding does not come through, that overall project has some challenges. And finally, yes, I would imagine there would be a further conversation back here, around what support council may or may not want to provide in that circumstance.
Okay. Thank you. I would just add that if that funding doesn't come back, or doesn't go forward, that conversation would come back to council in that regard. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. I don't see any other speakers. I'm going to ask if Councillor Stevens wants to finish off. No? Then we'll call vote on this item.
Deputy Mayor, with respect to the motion before you, the vote carries 9-0, again noting the absences of Councillors Mole and Zakitniak.
Okay, thank you. So can I have someone move a resolution for private session? Councillor Hawkins, I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed? It's carried. So we will have a half-hour break for lunch, and then we'll be going into private session. Thank you very much, everyone, for your work today, so far.